Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will start in 5 minutes. That session is the Minor Adjustment Beauty Salon, celebrating Alexander McCall Smith. And Alexander will appear in conversation with Festival Director William Dalrymple. While we're waiting for that session to come on, I'll just remind you that every evening during the Zee Jaipur Literature Festival there are music concerts at Hotel Clark Amir. And tonight the performers are Yom and Wang Li, who I saw in Pushkar a couple of months ago and they completely blew me away. They play clarinet and Jew's harp in a really high energy way that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. They'll be playing with Kutle Khan, Rajasthan's own. That concert starts at 7:30, it runs till 10 o'clock, and tickets are available on the door. It's 400 rupees to go into that concert. Also, I just want to mention very quickly the beautiful furniture we have on stage, which is courtesy of Royal Treasure, so our thanks go to them. In just a couple of minutes, we'll be kicking off with the next session. Thank you. I'll just take this moment to remind you of the tech benefits of being here as well. We do have an agenda app for those who don't want to necessarily refer to a print program. There is a phone number you can call and you will always get the information about the next set of sessions to come on. So if you're interested in doing that, the number to call is 9251 301 339. If you give that number a missed call, you will then receive information about the upcoming set of sessions. I'll repeat that number. It's 9251 301 339. Also, if you're tweeting, you could be in the running for prizes. The hashtag is ZJLF, so that's ZEEJLF. The more you tweet, the more points you'll get, and there are prizes being awarded at the end of the day for the top 10 tweeters. So do keep the tweets going. If you're really enjoying the festival, do let us know via Twitter.
I'm live.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Rajnikandah Silver Pearls front lawns. It is my great pleasure to announce two very charismatic Scots, Alexander McCall Smith and Festival Director William Dalrymple.
Sandy came to our festival when it was a rather smaller affair than it is now. And I think we had an audience last time of about 25 for him. So things have got bigger. Sandy, you had a perfectly sensible job for quite a lot of your life.
Yes.
What went wrong?
I decided to get an honest job. Well, I gave up the honest job. Actually, I'm just adjusting my mic. Really, I must tell our unfortunate Mike story. You may have forgotten it, but we had a wonderful experience with mics some years ago. We were doing that. Am I actually audible? Yes. We were doing the Edinburgh New Year Hogmanay event, and we were backstage. Willie and I were doing a joint appearance on that occasion, as indeed now, and we were backstage getting ready, and we had these lapel mics on, and Willie, this was in the green room before the event began, and Willie said to me, how old are your readers? And I said, well, my readers are a range. I've got some very young readers, and I've got some not so young readers. And then he said, well, my readers are really ancient. And that's the point at which the organizers could be seen running down the corridor towards us, waving their arms, and you transmitted that into the hall. But I said to him, well, look, don't worry, even if it is the case that we were transmitted into the hall, if your readers are that old, they won't have heard you. So it just actually goes to show you have to be terribly careful about these microphones. As Gordon Brown discovered, he had a microphone experience when he unwisely said what he thought of a voter just before an election. Anyway.
What did he do?
Well, I mean, poor man. It really was. It was the end of a difficult session, and somebody came, and one of the voters came and complained to him. Which is really, politicians don't like that. And he and he said, I think he got into the car. He was still connected to the mic and transmitting to the journalists, which wasn't very good. And he said, somebody said to him in the car, who was that, this voter? And he was very uncomplimentary in what he said about this woman, who was asking perfectly reasonable questions, as you did, but I've forgotten what your question was. What did you ask me, Willie?
I suggested that you once had a sensible job and gave it up for the literary life.
Well, yes, I did. I used to be a professor of law. I was professor of medical law at the University of Edinburgh.
Which is not a particularly humorous subject, one presumes.
Well, it has its moments, I mean, are you suggesting it's dull? And these historians feel everything else is very, very boring. But in fact, it was a perfectly interesting. It was a very interesting job. I liked it very much indeed. But I was always writing
at the University of Edinburgh.
At the University of Edinburgh. But I always wrote in my spare time. I had always, as most of us, you probably had your, I think you did have your first book published when you were 16, but most of us a little bit later. I sent my first manuscript off at the age of 8. I wrote a book and I sent it off to a publisher, and it was probably about 2 pages. And I remember what the title was. The title was He's Gone. But who he was and where he went and why, I can't remember. But the publisher wrote a very nice letter back.
He didn't come back.
He didn't come back. So I was writing in my spare time, and I wrote quite a number of children's books. I wrote, I think, about 35 children's books, which I got involved in doing by accident, in that there was a literary competition run by Chambers, the dictionary people, publishers, and I entered in two categories. One was a novel for adults, and the other was a novel for children. And I very much hoped that I'd win the novel for adults category, but I won the novel for children. And so I rather drifted into that, and once I'd had one published, there were requests for more. So I wrote all those children's books, and I was then writing short stories as well, and various things. And then...
And how did you do that with a proper university job?
Well, what I did was, I did it in my...
Could we have handheld mics, as these aren't working very well?
I did it in my spare time. So, you know, I would write in evenings, weekends, etc. And of course, okay, yeah. And so that's how I did it. And then eventually I sat down, and that must have been in about 1996, I think, round about then. I decided to write what I thought was going to be a short story about a woman who lives in Botswana, which is a country that I have quite a long connection with. Maramatswe. And I thought that I would write a short story about this woman who, her father, she's at the deathbed of her father, Obed Ramatswe, a very fine man, good judge of cattle, very nice man, and he says, when I die, sell the cattle and start into a business, and he thinks it should be a hardware store or something of that sort. And she says brightly, I know, I'll start a detective agency. And he gasps and expires. And so off she goes. And I rather liked the character, so I made the thing not just a short story, but it grew into a full-length novel. And I thought that would be it. I thought that I'd said what I wanted to say about Maramatswe, and I'd said what I particularly...
The number one ladies detective.
Number one ladies detective. And so that was published, and it was published to no great effect in the UK. It was published by a small publisher in Scotland. We had some quite generous reviews, but then it was imported by Columbia University Press in New York, and they started to sell it. And gradually they sold a few more copies, and then the New York Times did a full-page article about the first 4 of those books, because I'd done sequels, because I was then beginning to be affected by a condition which is a known risk in the literary world called serial novelism. And it's quite a serious condition. The symptoms are that you just write novel after novel in a serial. There's no known cure. You write novel after novel and then you die. And that's... for example, Patrick O'Brian, with his Jack Aubrey, those wonderful historical naval novels, he wrote 20 of those, and he's now dead. And it was most unfortunate. We shouldn't laugh, you know. Of course, for many authors, dying is a really good career move. You know?
You get better reviews when you're dead.
Exactly. Well, you know, funny enough, I was doing a signing in Atlanta, Georgia, last year, and in the signing queue, this lady came up to me, very politely. Her intention was in no sense hostile. I can see where this is like most signing queues. And she came up to me and she said, and very politely, you know something, you're going to be far more successful posthumously.
You didn't think on acting on her advice, though.
Well, you know, you get some very odd things happen in signing queues. On a previous American tour, I was in North Carolina, and I was doing a signing in a bookstore there, and there was this man in the queue who was looking at me very intensely, and I had somebody beside me who was a keeper provided for that particular bit of the tour, who was a bodyguard. I actually had a bodyguard. I had a gun. And I said, there's this man in the queue, and I'm a little bit worried about him. And the bodyguard said, yeah, okay, I got him. We didn't actually shoot him. But anyway, he came up to the table, And he leant across the table and said, "What are you doing afterwards?" And, this was a real shock. And, there are some people who ask that question more frequently. I never asked that. And my keeper said, "Oh, no, he's leaving town, that's it." And then he reached for a bag, and I thought, right, now there's going to be some altercation. He reached for a bag, and what was in it was his book. He just wanted me to read his book, and he'd printed this privately. He'd written a book. And so I was mightily relieved that this was the sole agenda. And so I took it. He didn't even want me to write to him about it, because normally people say, "Would you then write and give me further advice on what I should write next," or whatever. So he didn't ask for that. So I took the book back to the hotel. And honestly, Willie, it was a wonderful read. I only read about 3 pages, but it was 500 pages. And it was all about a man who was kidnapped by a shipload of nuns.
There could have been a series of that.
Well, you see, he was a little bit early for 50 Shades of Grey, you see. Poor man, that hadn't happened yet. He was before his time, because it was mind you, 50 Shades of Grey, many people don't realize that there's an interesting history behind that book, because that's published by my New York publishers. My publisher actually discovered that. She was surfing on the internet, and she noticed this. And it used to be, many people...
Where was she surfing?
No, Willie, you see, this is the point. Many people don't realize that started off as a book on interior decoration. It was purely on interior decoration. And the publishers received this, and it was all about colour coordination in the home. And they said, "This needs spicing up."
Returning to Myra Motzway, so you wrote one of these, and you're now on number 16.
I've written, yes, number 16 was The Woman Who Walked in Sunshine, and that was published last October. And I've just started volume 17. I started that when I was over in Chennai. I sat down in the hotel and began, and I will be writing more of it here in Jaipur. Courtesy of yourselves. while
the hotel is comfortable.
It's very comfortable. So I'll be writing more of that, and that'll appear in October.
And how do you? What is your writing schedule? Because you seem to produce 3 or 4 books a year, every year.
Yes, I do. That's breaking all known rules of publishing. We're meant not to write one book every other year is the general thing. But, I get up very early. I often start at about 4 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock, and I find that those early hours of the morning, or sort of late hours of the early morning, are very, very productive.
Because no one's around, no one's calling you.
No one's around, nobody's calling me, but it's also, I think the mind is quite fresh. At that stage in the morning.
Depends what time you've gone to bed.
It depends what time you've gone to bed. But we're respectable. I live in Edinburgh, and we're very respectable.
I remember.
So we're in bed by 9:30. So there we are.
Which brings us to Scotland Street.
Scotland Street, yes. Well, I've done volume 10 of that. The last book in the Scotland Street saga was volume 10, which was The Revolving Door of Life.
And what's Bertie up to?
Oh, poor little Bertie. Bertie's one of my favourite characters. Some of you may have read about Bertie. Bertie's a little boy he's 7. He started off in volume 1, which was about 10 years ago. He was 6. And he was 6 for 8 years. And everybody else was moving on. But I liked Bertie the way he is, so I've recently given him a 7th birthday, but just, and rather grudgingly, because Bertie was becoming increasingly concerned, and his friends were saying, "Isn't it about time you had a birthday, Bertie?" But Bertie's problem is his mother, and indeed, I think that's a universal truth that small boys of 6 or 7, if you ask them, what's your problem in life, they will usually say their mother. Mother is usually the problem, because mothers can be very pushy, and so the pushy mother is Bertie's problem. His mother's called Irene, and she's very, very pushy. We have a serious problem of excessively pushy mothers in Edinburgh. We have the highest incidence of pushy mothers anywhere.
You haven't been in Delhi. You should try the Punjabi.
Oh no, I know. Well, you see, that's the reason why Bertie's popular in India.
Bertie hasn't been made to do Bharatanatyam dancing by his third birthday.
Well, Bertie being 6, his mother makes him learn Italian so he can appreciate Italian culture. He goes to yoga lessons called Yoga for Tots, where the children are so small they can't even sit up, so they have to be pushed into yoga positions by their pushy mothers. He learns the saxophone. He does a very good rendition of As Time Goes By from Casablanca, which in his case it doesn't. And he has psychotherapy. He goes to psychotherapy with Dr. Hugo Fairbairn, author of that classic of child psychotherapy, Shattered to Pieces, Ego Dissolution in a 3-year-old time. And little Bertie, he just wants to be an ordinary boy, as most of these little boys want to do. He wants to be an ordinary boy, and in particular he wants to have a Swiss Army penknife, which is what most little boys and indeed most men.
I remember being forbidden one by my mother, by my Edinburgh mother.
Well, have you discussed that in psychotherapy? But little Bertie, he goes to an advanced kindergarten. While he's at his advanced kindergarten, his mother goes to a floatarium where she floats to de-stress. And she's at her floatarium one day while Bertie's at his advanced kindergarten, and her cell phone goes. She gets out of her flotation chamber, and it's the principal of the advanced kindergarten, Miss Christabel McFadgen, on the line, who says, would you kindly come up to the advanced kindergarten? There has been an incident. And so Irene goes off to the advanced kindergarten to be greeted by a hatchet-faced Miss McFadgen. Says, there's been an incident. One of the children has written graffiti on the toilet wall. And Irene bristles and says, well, why do you look at me? Why do you think it's my Bertie? And Miss McFadgen says, because he's the only one who can write. and then she adds, and it's in Italian. Poor little Bertie. I do actually give him a break from time to time. He went fishing with his father in the Pentland Hills, almost caught a trout, not quite. And then they got lost, and they ended up at a farmhouse, invited by the farmer's wife in, and went in, and there was a little boy called Andy, who was reading a little boy's life. And he says to Bertie, would you like to see my things, Bertie? Bertie says, yes, please. He goes up to Andy's room, and Andy opens a drawer, and there is not one, but 6 Swiss Army penknives. And Bertie's little heart fills with joy at the sight. And Andy picks up one of these penknives and says, this, Bertie, is a Swiss Army penknife. The Swiss Army fights only with penknives. And that's a little known fact, actually.
And you put your friends from Edinburgh into Scotland Street?
I do, yes. Yes. And I think you have appeared.
I appeared once.
You've appeared in Scotland Street. And I'll give you another walk on roll if you'd like. You can even say something if you wish. But I do know, I like putting raw people in. I always get their permission. And they never do anything that would cause them any distress. So anybody who appears in my books, a raw person,
is very well behaved.
Very well behaved.
I turn up at a dinner party, I think.
Is that your like that, John?
And then you've got the Dr. Eaglesfeld.
Yes, that's my Portuguese irregular verb series there. There are 4 books in that. There's the first one is called Portuguese irregular verb. Second one is called the finer point of sausage dogs. Third one was called The Villa of Reduced Circumstances. And then the final, or not the final one because I will write more, but the 4th one was called Unusual Uses for Olive Oil. This
isn't published by the same publisher as 50 Shades of Grey as well?
No.
You spice it up with a little chili oil.
They're entirely respectable.
And Isabel Dalhousie?
Isabel Dalhousie continues, yes.
Volume 10?
Volume 10 was the last one. That was called The Novel Habits of Happiness. And Isabel I really like as a character. She's a philosopher. She's a moral philosopher to trade. She runs something called the Review of Applied Ethics. And she's married to a much younger man. She's got a much younger man who had in fact been the boyfriend of her niece, Kat. And her niece, Kat, consistently had the wrong sort of boyfriends, as nieces often do, get the wrong sort of boyfriend. And she got one decent boyfriend, who was this young musician, a bassoonist called Jamie, and of course, because he was decent, Kat got rid of him. And Isabel continued a friendship because she rather liked him. She's 14 years older than he is, but she rather liked him. And I thought that was just going to be a platonic friendship between them. But I came under increasing pressure.
From the same publisher?
Well, yes. I came under increasing pressure to change that. And I did an interview for a journalist from the Daily Express in London who said to me, "You must let Isabel and that young man have an affair." And I was shocked by this suggestion. And I pointed out that we lived in Edinburgh and we didn't go in for that sort of thing in Edinburgh. And I said, "Well, why should they have an affair anyway?" And she said, "It would be very empowering for your female readers over 40. And so I did let it happen, and I received many letters from female readers over 40 who said they were indeed empowered by this.
Did they make merry with the olive oil?
So there they are, and I do enjoy Isabel because it gives me the opportunity to talk about all sorts of interesting ethical issues because of her interest in applied ethics.
That's the closest, in a sense, to your old life that it comes back into.
Yes, indeed, yes.
But you don't just do series, as if producing 4 or 5 books a year for the series isn't enough. There's My Italian Bulldozer is the new...
Well, I've just finished writing My Italian Bulldozer, and that'll be published in the UK in July or August, I think. I really enjoyed that. That's set in Montalcino. That's actually based on a real experience I had, which perhaps I could tell you about.
Please do.
Because it was the inspiration for and the model for this novel. What had actually happened was, I don't know what you like to do, Willie, but I rather like getting away to write from time to time. You go away from your normal life and you get concentrated time to work. I decided that I'd go off to Italy for a couple of weeks.
I think we just missed you there.
Well, indeed, that's right, yes. Well, I decided to go off to Italy to do some writing, and I wanted to go to a place called Montalcino, which you will know.
Very good wine.
A very nice place which produces this famous wine, Brunello di Montalcino, which is one of the finest Italian wines. Anyway, I decided to go off. I had permission to go off for a couple of weeks, and I went on a plane from Edinburgh to Pisa, and I started to talk to a chap sitting next to me in the plane, and he was an Italian businessman who'd been in Scotland. He sold ceramics, tiles, bathroom tiles, that sort of thing. And he was very, you know how friendly the Italians are. We had a nice conversation. And we arrived, the plane landed in Pisa, and we said goodbye, and off we went to get our luggage. I then went to the car rental place. I had rented a car, I had hired a car, and I had an email, printed out email, confirming this fact. But when I went to the office, they said, no record of this. And I said, well, what about this email here? There's the booking. And they said, no longer operative. And so I was really stuck. And I said, well, give me another car. And they said, no cars left because it was a holiday weekend, all the cars out. And then my new friend walked past, and he saw this, and he said, is there any problem? I said, well, I had reserved this car, no car, and I'm really stuck. And he said, don't worry, I know somebody who's got a vehicle renting place. I'll take you along to this vehicle renting place, and we'll get you fixed up. And again, that was an example of Italian friendliness and helpfulness. So we went off to this other place, and I met his friend, and his friend said, alas, all my cars are out. I've rented them all. However, I do have a bulldozer. And so I said, well, you know, I can't drive a bulldozer. And my license won't be valid. I'm licensed to drive a car. He said, no, in Italy, if you've got a UK car license and license, you can drive a bulldozer. And so I was really stuck, and they were being so helpful, and I really couldn't refuse this bulldozer. So I said, well, okay, I'll take it. So I went off, and it certainly...
Was there room for your luggage on the bulldozer?
Oh, yes, it was. It's quite a lot of room. Yeah, it had a sort of thing at the back where you put spades and whatnot, and I put the suitcase in there. We got to the bulldozer. I went round just to inspect it for damage, make sure that it was fine. And we set off, and it was wonderful. I went by bulldozer from Pisa to Montalcino.
And did that take up the whole holiday? Or?
No, it took quite some time. There are a couple of aspects about driving a bulldozer.
It's about, it's about 100 kilometres? Or?
It's something like that. So it was quite a decent drive.
Average speed, 50 miles an hour?
It was quite a sort of souped up. You know, Italian bulldozers go fast.
With a Lamborghini.
It was actually really very good. It did have tracks, but it had lightweight tracks, so you could go. The interesting thing about driving a bulldozer in Italy is that Italian drivers are very respectful of bulldozers. It's a sort of deep culture.
They're not normally respectful of other cars.
No, the bulldozers are. I can tell you that. And so they were absolutely fine with the bulldozer. And also, you get a very good view of the surrounding features of the countryside.
You can see over those horrible motorway.
Exactly.
Were you on the motorway?
No, side roads. No, didn't go on the bulldozers aren't allowed on the motorway. Was the sign. And so I was.
I've never tried this before, have they?
But you can see all the features of the countryside, and if there are any features you don't like,
Did you leave a trail of destruction? The Taliban from Edinburgh,
I arrived in Montalcino, and I went to book into the Albergo of Giglio, lovely little inn, and they said, that's fine, you can leave the bulldozer around the back, park the bulldozer around the back. And I had a very good couple of weeks then, did quite a lot. And I went and had coffee every morning. I'm going to finish shortly, this story doesn't go on too long. I went and had coffee in the morning in a lovely little fin de siècle cafe they've got there called the Freschetteria Italiana. And I had coffee, and I got to know the local priest who came for coffee at the same time. Very interesting conversations. He was very interested in Lombrosan criminology. And we sort of talked about that. And then just before I was due to go, he said, it was the day before I was due to go, he said, could you come and have lunch with my brother, who's got a winery, he's got a vineyard just at the edge of Montalcino. He's very keen that you should come round. And I said yes, and he said, could we go on your bulldozer? And I said, absolutely fine. So, because there were two seats, and I went off, and we had this wonderful Tuscan lunch.
Where did your wife go this time?
She wasn't there at all.
Right.
No, she remained in Scotland. And so we went there, and we had this lunch. Beautiful Italian Tuscan beans, lovely. They said simple Tuscan meal. It's about 6 courses. And then at the end he said, I'm just on the edge of the zone of production of Brunello de Montalcino. I'm just on the wrong side. So the grapes that I grow can't be used to produce Brunello de Montalcino. I have to produce simple Rosso de Montalcino, which is much cheaper. And I don't get such a good price. And the boundary between the zone of production of Brunello de Montalcino is a sort of earthenware long dike. And he said, could you possibly and so I moved the boundary of the zone of production.
You have enlarged
and moved it. And then we went inside. They were so grateful. And we went inside and we tasted it in what was now Brunello de Montalcino. That's absolutely true story.
And did you drive your bulldozer back? I will look out for battered walls in Montalcino next summer.
Some people don't believe that story, but it actually did happen.
So, but it isn't all writing. It's a lot of writing, but it isn't all right. There is the really, really awful orchestra.
Really terrible orchestra, yes. Really terrible orchestra was founded by my wife and me about 20 years ago, when we realized that there was a call in Edinburgh for an amateur orchestra for people who really couldn't play their instrument, and for musically challenged people. And so we advertised, and we were absolutely inundated with requests to join, mostly from clarinetists. There are an awful lot of clarinetists, and I wondered about that.
And there's nothing more awful than a bad clarinet.
Well, there is an awful violinist. But we had all these applications from these clarinets, and I wondered why it was that so many people appeared to play the clarinet. And then I realized it was because everybody learns the clarinet at school. It's absolutely standard thing for people to learn at school. And I suspect that virtually everybody here plays the clarinet. What happens is they learn it at school, then they forget about it, And it's only much later on when they're having psychotherapy that these repressed
clarinet experiences come.
Repressed clarinet memories come surfacing. And so we had all these clarinetists. And we started, and it became very, very successful. We became effectively the worst bad orchestra in the world, the best known bad orchestra in the world. We went on tour to New York, believe it or not. We almost filled the New York Town Hall.
Do you all start at the same time, or?
No. Well, actually, we tend to start roughly at the same time, but we never finish at the same time. And indeed, I am not making this up, really, but we actually had one occasion where, we had many occasions where the conductor actually has to stop us. But we had this occasion where the conductor stopped us and said, "There's something seriously wrong here." And we wondered what it was, and we discovered that in fact one section of the orchestra was playing an entirely different piece of music, and they got mixed up. And so we're hoping to go to Sweden next year. We were invited, for some reason best known to the Dutch government, to the Netherlands. And we went on to...
A double act with the Concerta Bar, or?
Something like that, yes. Well, not quite that level, but the next division down. And so, we really do enjoy it. And in fact, I think there should be a really terrible orchestra which should play at your literary festival each year. You should start one here in Jaipur. You need to get a professional conductor. We've got a professional conductor, but you don't actually have to pay him. You can get somebody who's doing community service. And if you speak to the local prosecution authorities and find out when the next conductor's appearing in court, it can be part of the plea bargain.
And you play the tuba?
Well, the tuba is one of the instruments that I have in the past played very badly. I started off playing the bassoon, and then I graduated to the contrabassoon because its notes are less exposed. With the contrabassoon, with the deep instruments, people can't really hear you. And so I thought that was the instrument for me, and I played that. And then I got a bit bored with that because I found the top notes too difficult. And I've then started to play the baritone saxophone, which is what I now play in the orchestra. It's not an orchestral instrument, but we're not a proper orchestra. So.
And you have no plans to tour India with them?
Well, I think that sounds like an invitation to the Jaipur Literary Festival. And really, we shall be here next year.
Thank you. and meanwhile, opera?
Yes, I did.
The Okavango Macbeth.
I wrote an opera called the Okavango Macbeth, which was set in the Okavango Delta in Botswana. What actually happened was that I was there with my New York agent and my New York editor, and we were...
He's also been here.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yes. We were on the river with a guide, and we saw these little buildings, little huts, underneath big trees. And I asked our guide who these were, and he said, "That's the baboon people." And I realized then, I just read a book. I'm sort of vaguely interested in a very amateurish way in primatology, and I read a book called Baboon Metaphysics by two American primatologists who'd spent years studying this particular troop of baboons in the Okavango. I realized this was their camp. So I said to our guide, "Could we go and see them?" And he said, "No, we don't like to disturb them." And I said, "I'm sure it would be right." And eventually I prevailed on him. And we approached across the river, and as we approached, I cupped my hands and I shouted across the river, "I've just read Baboon Metaphysics." And out of one of these huts, a figure came running, waving, calling us ashore. And I went on ashore and met them, and indeed were these people. And the book had been comparatively recently published, and they had yet to meet anybody who really read it. And there we were in the middle of the Okavango Delta. Anyway, in the course of that conversation, they revealed to me that female baboons are very ambitious for their males.
For Edinburgh.
And they're a little bit like that. And indeed, it's Lady Macbeth. Right. Female baboons have Lady Macbeth issues. And so I decided to tell the Macbeth story set in a troop of baboons in the Okavango Delta, and we called it, I got a composer who was interested in writing that, and we wrote this opera called the Okavango Macbeth, and it ran for a week in a little opera house that I'd set up outside Hibernia called the No. 1 Ladies Opera House, which was a tiny little thing, 50 seats. But the singers who did it, we had only one trained voice, and the rest were just enthusiastic amateurs. And we had the most wonderful, they loved it, and it was a marvelous, and the production then, it went to Edinburgh, went to Cambridge, it has been, and has been recorded, and it's very tuneful.
It's entered the canon.
It's entered the canon in a very, very minor way, but it's every so often it will be performed. So I was very pleased to have done that.
And the other thing you've got going is you've done a reworking of Emma.
Yes, I was approached by Collins publishers to participate in what they call the Austen Project. And they'd asked a number of people to rewrite, or do a new version rather, of Jane Austen's novels. Now, Jane Austen, of course, doesn't require rewriting, but as you know, there are a whole lot of people who do sequels, prequels, new versions, and so on. And so it took me about 45 seconds of profound thought before I said yes, I do it. And Joanna Trollope did one of the others, Val McDermott did another, and I was allocated Emma, and I had such fun doing it. I really, really enjoyed doing it, because Emma's, I think...
Where have you moved her to?
Well, I moved her, I actually was slightly tempted to move her to Tobermory in Scotland on the island of Mull, but I realised that would be an act of cultural expropriation, because Jane Austen is very English, and I think to make Emma Scottish would, in my view, have been a bit of an expropriation. So I kept her in England, but I moved her further north to Norfolk, and so she's just outside Holt in Norfolk, because I wanted rural England, and of course rural England has considerably contracted, and I think if one put a modern Emma where the original Emma had taken place, she'd be in suburban London or under an airport runway or something of that sort. So I moved her out. And the challenge with Emma is that she's actually really rather unpleasant. But you can't actually portray her as being so unpleasant that the audience loses sympathy, not the audience, the reader loses sympathy with her.
And what's her lifestyle? She's got an Aga, she's got Labradors? Or?
There are Agas. Her father's got an Aga, because she's lost her mother.
An Aga's a bit like a Tandor, but sort of... Yes. English Tandor.
So they do have an Aga. He, in the original Mr. Woodhouse, her father, was very worried about drafts. He was very obsessive about drafts. He's worried about viruses now because it's the 21st century. And so it just brings the whole thing up to date. And it's a modern version. I so enjoy doing it.
Do you ever sort of have a real urge to kill off your characters? I mean, is Mara Motsway going to sort of fall down a cliff at some point or be eaten by a tiger? Or?
No, I couldn't do that, particularly with her, because I think that would bring such distress to the readers. I think people, it is extraordinary when you're writing particularly serial novels, but I think this would apply to an extent with ordinary novels, but when you're writing novels in a series, people invest a lot of emotional energy in their relationship with the characters, and I think as the author you actually do lose, to use a contemporary expression, you lose ownership of the characters. The characters actually then belong to the readers, and I recognise that. I mean, I get tremendous correspondence all the time, people who feel that they've got some sort of relationship with the characters in my books, and I treat that very seriously. I mean, sometimes they take it to extremes. I had a letter from some readers in New Zealand who said that they really enjoyed the Mara Motsway novels, and then they went on to say, this woman went on to say, my husband and I pretend to be Mara Motsway and Mr. J.L.B. Mashcone all the time. And they sit there drinking Redbridge tea and calling one another Mara and Ra. And then I was in California some years ago. I was in a place called Santa Barbara, which is a very grand place in California, which you'll know well. And I was at this place, and I was invited to, I was doing an event, but I was invited to a reception after the event, dinner in this magnificent house, and I went along to it, and there were all the Santa Barbarians having fun in this...
Do they call themselves Santa Barbarians?
No, they don't. But I mean, yeah, they're probably Santa Barbarites or something like that. But anyway, these two ladies came up to me and said, "Your books have changed our lives." And I was obviously quite flattered by this, and I said, "Well, thank you very much." And then they told me in what respect. They said, "We bought a van." And they bought a van like Mara Matsuri's tiny white van. They painted it white, and they put new number plates on it which said TWV1, Tiny White Van 1, and they drive around Santa Barbara pretending to be Mara Matsuri and Mama Guzzi. Californians actually often don't have enough to do. I don't think they know that.
And do you write all these simultaneously? I mean, would you have Dr. What's he called?
Von Eaglefeld.
Von Eaglefeld, sort of, alternating another morning you pick up the other manuscript of Mara Matsuri, or do you do one at a time?
I prefer to do one at a time, but often the schedule is such that I end up doing more than one. So at the moment I'm writing volume 11 of Scotland Street, and I've started the new Mara Matsuri, and I've got one or two other things. So I'm writing 3 books at the moment. I try to keep the worlds separate. Every so often, and this doesn't happen very often, I think it's probably only happened once or twice, I can cross over into the wrong fictional universe. I did this once with the Mara Matsuri book. My editor in New York contacted me, and he said, "Oh, page 40, whatever it is, of the new manuscript, Mara Matsuri is beginning to sound a bit like Isabel Dalhousie." And he was right.
Speaking of a Scottish accent?
Well, she started going on about sort of county and sense of obligation and whatnot, which Mara Matsuri normally doesn't, whereas Isabel might.
But I mean, literally, of a morning, I mean, this morning, for example,
yes.
did you get up at 3 in the morning? And
I got up at about 2:30 or 3 o'clock. Yes.
I saw you at the party last night at about 11.
Yes, I left reasonably. I think I was probably one of the earlier, the more respectable people left the party earlier on, and it was a very fine party. But no, I was up and.
So you're fine with 4 hours sleep?
No, I go back to bed. I write for a couple of hours, then I go back to bed, and I have a second sleep, which actually I find quite restorative. And also, because of the particular rhythm that one is in, the stage one is in the sleep cycle, I find that I have very vivid and amusing dreams in the hour before I wake up finally at about 8:30 in the morning.
And do you dream the books? Or do you dream
well, I occasionally do. Occasionally I dream something which then will find its way into a book. I find that my dreams, and I think this might be a concomitant of being a novelist, my dreams actually have a sort of narrative feel to them. So I'm sort of vaguely, it's not quite lucid dreaming, but it sometimes approaches that in the sense that I'm aware of the fact that I'm in a story. Yeah. And that's quite interesting.
I definitely find, even with non-fiction, that if you have a manuscript by your bed,
yes,
and have been thinking all day about it,
yes,
it's not quite dreaming, but it's there while you're sleeping.
Absolutely right. I think that the sleeping mind, or the unconscious mind at that stage, I suppose one might say one's subconscious mind, is indeed dealing with the experiences of the day and with the thoughts of the day. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. But it also raises a rather interesting question about the source of fiction, and that I feel that fiction originates in the subconscious mind. There may be some cogitation, some sort of thought given to what you're going to write your next book about, what the plot will be, and indeed you may sit down and you may in a very conscious way develop the plot structure, the chapter structure, the course of events that are going to happen in the book. But I think all the time the subconscious mind is going over the story. And that's why when you're writing, and so many novelists will say this, that when you're writing, you can be surprised about what happens. With something completely unexpected will happen. For example, in my Botswana books, I think in volume 3 of the Botswana books, Mr. J.O.B. Matakoni becomes depressed. And I hadn't realized until that particular page, as I was writing that page, I didn't think that he was going to become depressed, and sure enough, he became depressed. And so I find that the plot can change really considerably. This one that I've just finished, My Italian Bulldozer, all sorts of things happened there that hadn't happened in the original true story.
Is it quite closely related, though, the two?
Well, to the true story?
Yeah.
Well, the true story isn't very true, really. No. I think I need to confess that.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please a big round of applause for Alexander McCall Smith. We will be taking questions, though.
Thank you.
How long do we have, Katrina? We have 10 minutes. So, hands up for questions. And wait till the microphone is brought to you.
We could have 10 one-minute questions or one very long question, Willie.
In this audience, probably one very long autobiographical question.
Since it's a true story, I'm curious to know how well a bulldozer handles around a corner, or do you just drive straight through it and eliminate it?
Well, most of the time, they gave me a very quick lesson before I went off. You control a track bulldozer by putting the brakes on one track and letting the other do the work. I hit about 2 or 3 walls on the way to Montalcino, but it was, you always come off better when that.
Good evening. My name is Meenu, and I'm a teacher with Presidency School, Ajmer. Okay, my question is, I've heard that you write 4 books in a year. Have you ever suffered what is termed as writer's block? Or is that rhetorical?
No, well, thank you very much for that question. No, touch wood, I haven't. I think that writer's block, there are 2 possibilities with writer's block. People talk a lot about writer's block, and indeed there are writers who say that they're suffering from writer's block. I think writer's block is possibly depression. I think that they're probably depressed. And there are 2 possibilities. One, they're depressed, or B, they've got nothing to say. And I think it's a possibility that...
Well, they could be depressed that they've got nothing to say.
And they could, yes. You see, a lot of people feel that they've got a book in them, and they may not have a book in them. These days, you can have an X-ray and see whether you've got a book in you. And indeed, with modern imaging techniques, they can tell what sort of book you've got inside you. So you go and they say, you've got an autobiography in there, or you've got an historical novel.
An MRB.
Yes, something like that.
Lady with leopard skin. Appropriately enough for a Botswana.
Hello, Chris Hollyfield from the Poetry Book Society in London. I wanted to ask whether Mama Romotsi was based on a true character or whether she's a totally fictional creation.
Thank you. The question of Mama Matsui being based on a real character, I think that as a developed character, she's completely fictional. There was one person whom I saw way back in 1981 when I was living in Botswana, who actually made me think that I would write about a woman in Botswana. So there was one historical person. I didn't really get to know anything about her, but I did see her, and because what she was doing, that rather impressed me, and so I thought I would write something.
Was she fuller-figured, like Mara?
She was fuller-figured. She was traditionally built. And then when I started to write about the character Mara Matsui, I was then basing her on a very large number of people I had met. So she was a composite, in a sense, of characteristics I'd met in women in Botswana, a certain sort of woman in Botswana who's very competent, very intuitive, very charming, with a nice smile, and traditionally built. And so there were many people like that. Interestingly enough, I'm often approached by people who've been to Botswana, perhaps gone on holiday in Botswana, spent a few weeks there, whatever, and they say to me, oh, we met Mara Motswe, you know, there was this lady in the safari camp, and she was Mara Motswe, she looked just like. So I think that I've got the type right, but she's really based on a type that does exist as opposed to... I tend not to base my fictional characters on real people. I put real people into the books under their own name, but the fictional characters, I think if you base on a real person, you've actually, firstly, it could be very unfortunate if the real person realized that they were the model for a character who then does something, doesn't come out very, very well, so it's safer to keep away from that.
Front here?
At front?
I've got number 3.
Okay, whoever got Mike?
I've got number 3, up the back here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed both reading your novels and hearing you speak, but can you tell us a bit more about how it was that you came to know Botswana? What was happening in your life that you were living in Botswana?
Yes, thank you for that. When I worked with the University of Edinburgh, I looked after the students who came to us from the joint University of Botswana, Lesotho and Swaziland. And so I had a sabbatical in 1980, and I went and spent that in Swaziland, working at the University of Swaziland. And I then went over to see friends who lived in Botswana. So I gradually started to know a little bit more about the country. And then the following year, I was asked by the University of Botswana to set up a new law school that they wanted to do there. So I went and I did that, and that's when I first lived in Botswana. And then I went back every year. I had various projects. I wrote a book on the criminal law of Botswana with a colleague in Botswana, so I was working on that and various other projects, and I ended up going to Botswana for a short period every year. So that, I had no idea at that stage that I was going to be engaged in a very long literary conversation with this country, but that's when I really developed my affection for the place, because I do like the country immensely. I admire Botswana, and I've never really made any secret of the fact that these books are a love letter to the country in a sense. I look at the positive. I feel that overwhelmingly the story is a positive one in Botswana, and this is my recognition of it.
Because Africa is not normally portrayed in an optimistic way. It's
often portrayed very unfairly. People look at sub-Saharan Africa and they concentrate on all the pathologies, economic pathology, social pathology, all the difficulties, etc. And they don't actually really say anything about the positive stories which are there. There are an awful lot of people leading very good lives, often in very difficult circumstances. So these books, I think really, that's the bit that I wanted to look at anyway, and that's what I'm concerned with.
Hi, I'm Priyanshi. Well, I've just been into writing, entered myself with, writing articles and stories and things. But what provokes me to question you is, since you've been hitting up 3 to 4 books a year, hasn't there been any moment where you feel like, okay, the writer's struggle, wherein you feel, okay, you plan up really well, and then you end up like, no, that's not working. So how do you overcome that stress? Because at times when I sit to think, and I start writing,
yes,
and it's almost the end, I think no.
It's not going to work. Oh dear. I know. You raise very interesting questions with that question. I think I wouldn't embark on something that I didn't think was going to work, and so I think experience has just taught me to make sure that I want to write the thing that I'm going to write. Very, very occasionally, I might feel that a section or a bit of it isn't appropriate or isn't working, and I'll abandon that. But I don't. The answer, of course, is practice. It's just sheer practice, just writing. And I'm sure that Willie will agree that actually the more you write, the more adept you become at it. You become better at it. It's like playing the piano.
I
in a
think
sense.
also a bit like jogging or preparing for doing a marathon or something.
Yeah.
Is that I find if I have been researching in one of the history books for 2 years, that when you start, you're like a very unfit runner who huffs and puffs after a couple of rounds of a circuit.
Yeah.
But if you keep at it, by 2 or 3 months in, you're getting really fit.
Yes.
And I find with one of those big books, I write the second half at least twice as quick.
That's very interesting. And now, that of course, the brain scientists who are explaining all these things to us now, contemporary neuroscience is the answer to everything, but I think it's a question of brain pathways, which is exactly the same with developing a skill with a musical instrument. That's why it's so difficult to learn the piano as an adult, because it's much more difficult to establish those automatic brain pathways which enable you to carry out what, after all, is an extremely complex exercise with the fingers. And this writing is the same, that you develop that practice, you develop the roots between the bits of the subconscious mind that is making it up, or ordering the ideas in the case of non-fiction, and the mode of expression. And so I think it's down to that. Develop these appropriate neural networks.
It is like training. It's
like training. Yeah.
Time for one last. That gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you. Good.
Yeah.
You came to writing late in life.
Yes.
And have been very prolific and creative since then. But I was wondering, I was indeed concerned as to where all this stuff went before you started writing. In particular, whether the clinical prose of your medico-legal reports perhaps became embellished with any of it.
Well, I think I probably was writing quite a bit of fiction from my early 20s, but it was juvenilia, much of which, or most of which, fortunately, was never published. I think part of it might have been sublimated in various ways.
Did you have the rejection slips like J.K. Rowling? I mean,
I gather you never had. You're the one. This is the only author in the history of literature who never had. That when I first read that you had your first book published when you were still in short trousers.
22.
Yes. Well, what? 22.
21.
Every author who's read that story really has been filled with anger. Paul really doesn't realize how much people actually, their first reaction when they read that is one of rage. Because we all get rejection slips, and here's a man who's never had a rejection slip.
You went through endless novels which never saw the light of day.
Yes, I had a wonderful collection of rejection slips, which just about every author, apart from myself, actually has a drawer of these rejection slips, ranging from the courteous and the considerate, the sympathetic, to the others who say, is there anything else you could do? Woodwork. Or whatever. So everybody has rejection slips. And of course, in many cases, the rejection slips are utterly merited. Because when one is 22 or whatever, usually what 22-year-olds write is really pretty awful. I mean, there are...
What normally happens with young authors is they then go around trying to find copies of their books in their friends' bookshelves and destroying them.
Well, you see, the thing is actually with writing, I think that you can start writing when you're very young, and you can be encouraged to write. But I think I'm a little bit skeptical about whether you can teach it, whether you can go to a creative writing course and come out at the end of a year's course a writer. I'm not sure whether you can do that. I think that may help to an extent. But actually writing, what you're doing when you're writing is you're talking about your human experience, your reaction to the world. And that actually requires involvement in things, and it involves getting into the messy business of living. And so you may have something to say, in your 20s, particularly if you've gone out and sought experiences, which I think you did, and that's fine. Or some people are just very mature at an early stage and do that. But a lot of writing by very young people may be a little bit introspective and may not really have, may not reflect an immense amount of experience in the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause, please, for Alexander McCall Smith.
Thank you. Really, thank you.
Let's give it up for Alexander McCall Smith and William Dalrymple.
Thank you.
Now, unfortunately, we have to whisk Alexander McCall Smith away for press, so he won't be signing, and William has to dash to another session. So I'm sorry to disappoint those of you who would have liked to have had your book signed. I'm sure there will be other opportunities during the festival. The next session here at the Rajnigandah Silver Pearls front lawn will be happening in 15 minutes. That session is An Unsuitable Boy with Karan Johar and Poonam Saxena in conversation with Shobha Dey. That session will be presented by Z Entertainment. And I'll run you quickly through the other sessions in the other venues coming up in 15 minutes at 3:45. In the Charbagh, it's The Tears of the Rajas. That's Ferdinand Mount in conversation with Swapan Dasgupta and William Dalrymple. That session is presented by the Getty Foundation. In the Google Mogul tent, we have a Booker bookshelf. Sanjeev Saheta, Anuradha Roy, and Marlon James in conversation with Anjum Hassan, and that session is presented by Amity University. In the Baitak, the next session is Kavad, the itinerant storytellers of Rajasthan. That session is with guests Meena Sabnani and Shri Kojaranji and accompanists. That session is part of the Dainik Bahaskar Basha series. In the Mahindra Humanities Durbar Hall, the next session is More Money Than God, Hedge Funds and the Making of the New Elite. That session is with Sebastian Malaby in conversation with Mihir S. Sharma, and it's presented by the State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur. And finally, in the Ford Samvad going in at 3:45 is Writing for Children, Writing as Children with Nandanath Dev Sen, Jerry Pinto and Paro Anand in conversation with Nayanika Matani. That's presented by the Aga Khan Foundation. Here at the Rajnigandah Silver Pearls front lawns, the next session is An Unsuitable Boy, Karan Johar and Poonam Saxena in conversation with Shobha Dey, presented by Z Entertainment. We are clearly expecting a very large crowd for this session, and I will ask you to be very mindful of all the people around you. We don't want anybody getting squashed or injured, so please do make space for others. Try not to congest the passageways that allow for a clear exit. I'll remind you to turn off your mobile phones or put them on silent as well, and no flash photography is permitted during the session. We'll be going in shortly. Thank you. I've just been informed that Alexander McCall Smith will indeed be doing a quick signing. So for those of you who are very keen to go and meet him and have your book signed, he will be at the book signing area. It's in the far left corner at the front lawns here in the red and white stand. That's the signing area for the front lawns. Thank you.
We believe in bringing the world together through entertainment. Z Entertainment. Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. The world is my family.
I mean, if they're sitting down, that's okay.
Okay.
But
So these ones can stay and these ones can go. All right. Little bit of housekeeping in terms of public safety. We'd like to keep one of these aisles clear, and that is the horizontal one here. So anyone in the horizontal aisle, the way that I'm gesturing now, I'm afraid you're going to have to clear to the side and leave that passageway clear. If you're in the vertical axis here and you're sitting down, that's fine. Please, anyone in this row here, standing up currently, please move to the side and keep that aisle clear.
Listen, we can't do that because what's happening is you're blocking the people standing behind you, so that's somewhat unfair. There's a lot of place at the back. Just move out. Please move out of that corridor. Yep, keep moving. I hope the ladies who were, you all should be protesting. Say please, yeah. Go for it. The silent protest doesn't work. It's India, remember. The nation wants to know. Just keep moving. Guys, now the central aisle, either you have to sit down or you have to move back. Because again you're going to block. Keep moving. Keep moving out. Keep moving out. Keep moving out and go to the back. You can see the screens from the back. Keep moving. Thank you very much. Guys, moving out means moving out. It doesn't mean I'm going to take half a step and stop. No. Keep moving. Come on. Keep moving. Please, or sit down. I mean, one of the two. If you can sit down and see, sit down. You can't stand there. Move all the way to the edge of the chairs. No, push them back. Don't look at the phone. Just keep pushing them back. Keep going. Keep going. 3 more chairs. Come on. 2 more. Nearly there. Are you guys okay there on the side? You're not crowding anybody you can see? So you're the gatekeeper. You have to say, don't come in front of me. Please sit down in the middle aisle. Please sit down. Sit. Thank you.
हीरे मोती से कब तुलती हैं खुशियाँ, शोहरत दिल की कमान, बाजार में कब बिकती हैं खुशियाँ, शोहरत दिल की कमान।
क्षण की एक अलग चमक होती है। रजनीगंधा सिल्वर बल्ब्स, सिल्वर कोटेड इलायची।
Journey that keeps you on the move. This everyday journey. What does it bring us? Hopes and dreams for a better tomorrow. The power to form connections forever. Because the journey is just as important as the destination.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls front lawn for a much anticipated session, An Unsuitable Boy, presented by Z Entertainment. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Karan Johar, Poonam Saxena and Shobha Dey.
Good afternoon. I have never seen this enthusiastic a crowd at the Jaipur Lit Fest, and it's for you, Karan. Forget Nobel laureates. The main man is here. Not true, thank you. Not true, says Karan. But it's a wonderful, wonderful response. I can see a lot of fans in the audience and people who are just curious to know about the book, which is An Unsuitable Boy. Karan has very sportingly declared this afternoon that he is willing to talk about anything. He said, ask me anything. So let me, anything. Anything, Karan.
Go for it, Shobha. And who better than you to ask me anything?
So let's start with Poonam and your association and the way the book came about. I'm extremely proud and honored to be publishing this under my imprint, the Estee book, the umbrella of Penguin Random House. And the wonderful thing about Karan, who Poonam and I have both known well as a friend for the longest time, was how spontaneously he agreed. He just came on board and said yes. And we did tell him that it is his life story, and like all good life stories, it has to be the truth and nothing but. He was complete, like he is tonight, this afternoon. He was just open, receptive, enthusiastic. And mind you, in a country which produces one of the largest number of films in the world, our material, our books representing Bollywood and regional cinema are pretty limited when you consider how many books there are. I mean, each person in Karan's place anywhere in Hollywood would by now have maybe 5 books and more as they go along. So it's a privilege, and thank you, Karan, for making the time to come here. You do know they've hired extra security just for you.
Where are they, as long as they're good looking?
So let me just go straight into the book, and there is an incredibly disarming and wonderful moment about your childhood where you say the worst word to hit you as a schoolboy was the word pansy. So do you want to talk about that and the first time that happened when you were about to debate?
Well, I think the kids, I grew up in South Bombay, and it was kind of what I call a snooty neighborhood. And everyone there was like kind of completely against the grain of Bollywood. So it wasn't cool to say that your father made Hindi movies. So even me, like I kind of like had to kind of bite the bait of that and say that my father was a businessman. That wasn't so much the problem, but I was an extremely effeminate child. Like I didn't know what to do with my hands or my feet. It was just the way I was. And the word that used to scar me, and you know, when the kids, especially the building kids, were more sensitive because they'd grown up with me. But you know, it's with kids that came from other buildings and, you know, other schools and the other domains really around us, and they would use the word. And I think I discussed this at length with Poonam, and it's a large part of my childhood, is the word pansy, which was not used today at all actually. It's not a this zamane ka word, but it used to be used a lot in the 80s and the late 70s, which was a word for being effeminate. And that bothered me to no end. Of course, I have no problem with the fact that I was that. I don't regret who I was, and I never will. But that word used to scar me at that point. It made me feel like I was different from the other boys. And that used to I used to come home with that baggage. And I still remember those nights that actually were difficult because of that one word. Of course, later on in life, I grew to realize it meant nothing, and that I was who I was and I had to be who I was. So there was no looking away from that.
And Karan, you also said that since you were an overweight child, everybody used to sometimes say, you know, fatty or words to that effect, and that upset you a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I was stupid. If you were fat and someone called you fat, I don't know why it should have been a problem. I mean, because I had a combination of Punjabi and Sindhi parenting, and they really, if you have a Punjabi father and a Sindhi mother, you should not believe them. Because when my father used to call it puppy fat, and he said, "Chala jayega, kya hai?" And my mother was just blinded. They both thought I was the most beautiful child in the world, and that I had a little puppy fat. And my father insisted at 15 that if I lose that puppy fat, I can be a Hindi film hero. And I didn't know how to convince him that there was no way I could have been a Hindi film hero. I didn't have the personality, the body language, or the persona to pull that off. But he thought I was the best looking child in the world. So, you know, even though I was called fat, and I was called, which I was 150 kilos plus, and still it used to be, I was like, he called me fat, but someone had to tell me, you are fat, lose that bloody weight. But that no one said to me, unfortunately. I was just given more food when I cried.
Poonam, how difficult was it for you to get Karan initially, to establish a rapport? Because a book is only as good as the rapport that's established between the person who's getting you to share your life with the world, actually, because you don't even know who that book will eventually go, or who will be reading it and how it will be received. It's an act of enormous courage. And of course, knowing Karan and being a friend, he trusted you enough with aspects of his life that he's not shared previously. And how did you make that initial breakthrough, and how did the whole process start with him? Because you live in Delhi, Karan lives across the world, actually, not just in Mumbai, but he's a global citizen now, and with a very, very hectic, very busy schedule. How did that happen? Because it's important to know the mechanics of how a book like this gets put together.
I'll answer the question, and then I'd like Karan also to answer the question. So I think what happened was that living in Delhi was probably a good thing, because this is not a magazine interview that I ring him up and I go and I spend 20 minutes with him and I come away. The idea was, and even for Karan to sit and look back at his life and reflect and think and remember and recall and look at himself and his life in a very unsparing sort of way, I think he had to also get into the zone, so to speak, you know. So we would never meet for less than 2 hours, and he would make sure that he was completely free and undisturbed. And while we were talking also, I could see him, you know, things coming back, and it was actually very intense. And I think after the end of every long session we used to do, I think he used to feel quite drained and quite tired, because it was quite emotional, I think, the whole experience of reliving moments of his life. And I think you have to push a little. You have to sometimes, you know, hit at a raw nerve, maybe. You have to go there, and you want to be as gentle as you can. But you have to do that, and you know, all credit to him that he never sort of brushed anything away. He didn't say, oh, I don't want to talk about this. He was completely open and very, very frank. So I think it was those very intense, long sessions where he just spoke.
So which was the rawest nerve? Which was the most difficult part, the sharing of which aspect of your life?
I'd like to say that it was amazing to do these sessions with Poonam. Poonam is somebody I've known for various years, and there are very few members of the media that you kind of strike a rapport with, and then that builds into a relationship. And I think Poonam and I have known each other. As soon as Shobha told me it was going to be Poonam, I was ecstatic, because I felt that there was a sense of trust almost from the history we've shared. And she's right, the sessions that we spoke at 2 hours long each were really intense and were more like therapy. Like, I'm not in therapy at all, maybe I should have been a couple of years ago, but it's something that I felt like Poonam became like my unofficial therapist, because when you talk about your childhood, your problems, your trials, your tribulations, you do touch many raw nerves, because we've all been through, like, it's very easy for the outside for people to think you've had a very cushy, nepotistic existence. You know, my father was a filmmaker, I'm a filmmaker, what struggle could there have been? But there are personal struggles, you know, there are struggles about you as a human being, there are struggles, you know, there's so much conjecture about you as a person, your sexuality, your orientation, there is so much said around you that, you know, sometimes it kind of becomes either you go out externally and kind of express yourself, or you go internal. And I think I was somebody who kind of internalized a lot of my fears, my insecurities and complexes. And it takes a book sometimes to make you realize who you really are. And I encourage most people in the public face to actually experiment with actually putting out a book, even if no one really wants to read it, because it's a really, really self-elevating experience. To me, this entire process of this book, I don't know how it will be received, and I'm sure it's in great hands with Poonam and Shobha at the helm of things, but to me it was a deeply cathartic and a hugely therapeutic experience.
What would you say was the hardest, toughest thing for you to reveal? Is it
which I don't know if I have yet revealed, but I think we touched upon a lot to do with my personal life. Well, what do I say? Revealing in today's times can land you in jail. So we're in a tough country to speak about your personal life. And I feel really sad about it, because being a public figure, you're expected to kind of helm a certain movement, talk about freedom of expression, which is the biggest joke in the world, I believe. Democracy is the second biggest joke, I think. I really think that how are we democratic? I mean, how is there freedom of expression? I'm a filmmaker and I feel bound at every level. You know, be it like to do with what I put out on celluloid or what I say in print. I feel like there's always like some kind of a legal notice awaiting me. You know, everywhere I go, I'm scared. Like, I'm scared I'm saying something in Jaipur, I don't know who will file a case when I get home, you know. And so I've become like some kind of an FIR king now. I mean, literally, I mean, it's all happening around me. I'm still like, we finally won the national anthem case, which was 14 years ago. 2 days ago, I no longer have to apologize for putting the national anthem in my film in an emotional, proud manner. So it's like that, you know, Shobha. It's like we eventually have to say what we have to with so much clever policing. Fortunately, language is a great thing. It makes you say things and yet not.
Do you want to tell them what you did about 3 or 4 days ago in Mumbai, which was your way, I guess, of protesting against the beef ban in Maharashtra? It was a joke?
How do you know that? Oh God, word does get around.
Why don't you tell them about it? It's out anyway.
Is it really?
Yes, Karan, it's out. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I've been kind of out of it then, I think. Well, it was a joke. It was really a friend, I don't want to mention any names unless the names are already out. Friend who kind of was a major prankster, and we decided, and he kind of, I think, does stock a fair amount of beef at his house on the sly. And we kind of set up this entire, you know, the MTV Bakra, all of you must be aware. So we set up like 2 cops who would come to his house and to scare him that, you know, we're going to arrest you because we believe you're stocking beef in your fridge. And we did that, and it was a successful prank. He was horrified, and he was all set to kind of call anyone he knew who could have helped him out of that situation. And it was the biggest, we recorded it, and I've never seen his face that white in my life. It was amazing that we had this, but can you believe that this is actually meant to be a joke? It should have never been a joke. Unfortunately, that's what it's amounted to.
Did you participate as actively as some of your colleagues in the tolerance and intolerance debate? And if you didn't, did you stay away for some reason?
Look what happened as a result of anyone who said anything on it. I mean, you know, I make movies, Shobha. I'm fighting megalomaniac movie stars every day. Do I need to fight the governance?
Censors?
We're fighting them with every film. I mean, I don't know what to say anymore. Like every time a dialogue draft of a film comes with me, we have a legal department that reads the dialogue draft and highlights what will be like not allowed. And invariably, all I have is a highlighted script. Because, you know, you can't write anything. You can't say anything. And we're supposed to be, as I said, democratic.
Do you feel more confident about this with Shyam Benegal and the committee?
Exceptionally, and I was so thrilled to know that there was a committee formed that, you know, that Shyam Babu actually is helming. He's such a prolific, such a progressive mind that look, we are all responsible filmmakers. None of us really would want to put out stuff that would truly cause damage to the DNA of our society that surrounds us. We don't want to do that. But there is so much we have to say. There's so much I want to say. I'm sometimes exploding with opinions and ideas and ideologies that I can't put out on celluloid, which is really sad and unfortunate. So when minds like that helm the movement, it's very heartening to know that, you know, there is somebody listening to us somewhere and we're really begging for, like, you know, for progressiveness.
There's a wonderful line, Poonam, that I'd just like to share with our many readers out there, viewers, readers, fans. Karan says at one point, "Today I can say yes, films are my life. I still feel different, but those childhood fears have long gone. I'm sorted in my head, and I have a sense of belonging and coming home to movies." And that was very hard initially, wasn't it, for you when you were growing up in an atmosphere that didn't quite encourage your passion for movies? You also talked about Karan as a young boy locking himself in his room and dancing in front of a small mirror to Bollywood tunes, and his parents not being completely comfortable with any of it.
I think, as he said, he grew up in this really snooty South Bombay neighborhood where Hindi films were not cool, and he also tried to suppress that part of him. And but there was, as he said, this hysterical Hindi film fan always lurking inside, waiting to come out. And well, it did one day. But yeah, I think secretly you were a fan of Sri Devi, and you know, you danced to
I don't really blame my mother. If I was dancing to Tofa Tofa in the middle of my drawing room, it was not something the average boy in the neighborhood did. or suddenly breaking out into some kind of a, like, where every time, like, I saw this film Sargam and Duffly Wale, but I was only dancing to Jaya Prada's part for some reason. And my father somehow never found it abnormal, because he would say, Karan, Duffly Wale pe nacho, and to show his friends that I could dance, but I was only dancing to Jaya Prada's part. And the Duffly was always just put aside. The Rishi Kapoor part was just annulled. And for some reason, nobody thought it was strange.
But isn't that wonderful on so many levels?
I think that the innocence of my father's understanding of various things was a reason why he thought that me doing the Duffly Wale dance was something that was normal.
But Karan, your parents were not keen for you to go into films, no?
Not at all, because my mother was a firm believer that it's a very unstable profession. She was really keen that she felt my father was a very inadequate businessman, and that I was doing the same, and that I hadn't inherited her Sindhi genes, that I had no understanding of monies and what to do. So I remember I got into the arts. I had a very high percentage in my ICSE, which was the 10th board exam. I had 88%, but I wanted to do arts. And so I got into St. Xavier's College of Arts, and 5 days later I walk into my home and I see my mother weeping. And I was like, why are you crying? And she's an educated, affluent, well-read, well-traveled woman. And she was like, because you're doing arts. So I was like, why didn't you tell me before? She says, I don't know, I couldn't muster the courage, because you're doing sociology and psychology, and how can I have a son who's doing arts? So I was like, and because I was impressionable at that point of time, she didn't realize that it had affected me, that she was so upset by my academic decision, that I decided to then join HR College of Commerce and Economics. And it's odd, because I joined that college, that's the people I met in that college is what drove me to an artistic atmosphere anyways. So I suppose what's going to happen will happen. But it was, I don't think that she understood, and that's what I tell parents today. It was not that she was being insensitive to my need. She was worried about my future. But today I think parents are so much more understanding of their child's dreams, and I always tell parents that. I'm like, please allow them to nurture their dream. They don't need to do what your husband or your father is doing. They don't need to. They must pursue their passion, because you can make an entire career of it. If I sat behind my father's, he also had an import-export office. If I just sat behind that desk, I would have been a miserable person today. But I did, even if I didn't make the kind of money I perhaps have made, and I've been fortunate, I would have still been satiated doing what I love to do. Even if you're paid less, you have to do what you love to do, because money cannot be the be-all and end-all of your existence. It should not.
I remember once, Karan, you had shared a particularly poignant story with me at the time when your own father was really down and out. He'd been very successful, and suddenly his films had flopped. Things were tough, financially and otherwise. And the film industry can be a very cruel place. There is really no space for failure, and there's no space for losers. And I remember you telling me that from being escorted to the front row at various awards functions, suddenly your invitations started to, well, almost disappear. And when you were invited, you were sitting in the back row with your parents, and that hurt you terribly. And there was maybe there were one or two people who showed your father and your mother the respect that they once did, regardless of whether he was a flop or a success, and those are the people you value the most in your life and in the movie industry. I'm not naming them, but maybe you'd like to share that with the audience.
My father, Shobha, gave about 5 failures in a row as a film producer. Those days, it was not, there was no studio funding. There were personal financiers that gave you money, and then if you were not be able to return that money, you had to sell your jewelry and house. As dramatic as it sounds, it's what happened. Like, we had to sell a flat, my mother's, my maternal grandmother's flat, so much jewelry. When there was a film called Muqaddar Ka Faisla that bombed in 1987, and then we made a film called Agnipath that met with no commercial success. So we actually went through really trying times. It was those times that I realized that, as much as we call our industry a fraternity, it's not. The ground reality is that it's not. Failure is not a welcome guest in our world. And unfortunately, today I think people are a lot more sensitive, because I think times have evolved, and I think so has the human core. But then I remember there were premieres that we used to get invited to. And when you got a row, A to Z was the general trajectory of where you sit. but certain screens had A starting from behind and certain screens from A starting from front. So when you were given C, you didn't know if C was right at the back or right in front. So I would call the cinema hall and check. And if I thought it was right in front and they were really embarrassing seats for my parents, I would go. You know, but I would tell Papa, don't go. And I would never tell him that, I would never say that the seat was bad. It was a code we had. I would just tell him that, Papa, I'll go and see this movie. That meant, don't come, the seats are not good. And we built this into an understanding. But I did see him upset sitting at home, even shed a tear. And to see your father cry in front of you sometimes or shed a tear when he was not a part of a film event or a party of a friend of the past who's no longer inviting you anymore. It's a very heartbreaking sight. When you see success and then you see failure, it's probably worse than never seeing success at all. I think that having that rug just ripped off your feet is a very, very heartbreaking feeling. And I've seen that. That's why today, I think that's what's grounded me as a human being, because I've seen my father go through that for over a decade and more. I've seen my mother, I've overheard their conversations where they didn't have the money to send me out. You know, I didn't want to study in India. I wanted, like all the kids around me in Malabai, because as I said, I grew up in an affluent neighborhood. But I remember that putting all that energies back into what I did best is work in my city and try to do the best with my environment. But they seem like, you know, whenever I speak through my films, people feel like Zoya Akhtar and I spoke the other day and said that we are kind of cursed for our first world problems on celluloid. It's because like, oh, you don't make real films and you don't know about real people, and that's not true. We make films that are aspirational, we sell dreams, and that's also a big part of a filmmaker. So I don't know why we're ever criticized for that. We've all been through a journey of loss, of love, of emotional meltdowns, but it doesn't mean that we express that on celluloid. Sometimes just selling a dream, even if it's a rich one, is good for the soul, and who doesn't like a good soul moment?
You know, Kuch Kuch Hota Hai Karan was a game changer on many levels. It transformed young cinema and broke away from the formula. And it also, I think Manish is with us this evening, Malhotra, and all of you young, absolutely fresh thinking collaborators produced a film that shook up the film industry a lot. You changed the way the film looked, and you've spoken at length to Poonam about it and its making. And Poonam, do you want to tell the audience a little more about that chapter, that phase in his life? Because after that, nothing was the same again for Karan.
I think one of the most magical parts of the conversations we had was Karan's entry into the film industry as an assistant with Dilwale Dulhania and then making his own film, Kuch Kuch. But Kuch Kuch was really special because it was his first film. His parents were really nervous. They didn't know what he was going to make, and then he made this film which turned out to be this huge hit and which was a trendsetter and a game changer and everything, as you said. And it was actually it's a very joyous and emotional part of the book. I don't know if you want to share with the audience. Do you remember you said how you couldn't even attend the premiere because you were inside in a little room because there was this death threat?
Well, it was really strange. We were releasing the film on Friday, October the 19th, 1998. And on Monday, when we were making the premiere invites for the film, my mother very proudly, who actually on day one of the shoot of the film had asked me whether I know where to put the camera. And whether I still have, and she told me, run. I said, run where? I mean, I can't leave my own house. And the film said, she's saying, if you don't want to make this film, run. And I said, how can the director just run away from the film set? So she said, I'm just worried you don't know what you're doing. Anyway, but she, by the end of it, was really proud, and we were doing the premiere invites, and that's when there was a whole underworld zone at that time that was calling all the filmmakers. And I had gone down to drop my aunt, and I was wearing a red t-shirt, and someone from the underworld called my mother and said that your son's wearing a red t-shirt and we're going to shoot him right now. And my mother has of course panicked and got a semi-cardiac arrest. By the time I came up, she just held my hand. pushed me into the room and locked me in for some reason without really telling me why I'm locked in. Till the cops and my dad came, and I was banging the door like a Hindi film heroine, you know, like get me out, because she was so nervous. Finally, when she got out and, you know, I was told what has happened, we were all petrified. And she looked at me, she said, I hope this film flops, you know, because we are simple middle class people, we don't want these underworld threats. So I was like, but, you know, I don't know what to do. So the premiere happened, and the cops were all around me, and I was put into this room because they were like, you never know who's really at the premiere. So I was getting this blow-by-blow account from my assistants who came and say, oh, they clapped here, they laughed here. And at the end, the entire industry stood up and clapped at the end of Kuch Kuch Hota, and I wasn't there to see it. And it was really quite sad. And that very night, we took the flight to London because we had to get away. So I wasn't here for the first 3 weeks of the film's release. I was getting calls, like I remember the Tuesday of the first Tuesday of the film release on Friday, and Aditya Chopra, and I went to call him from the phone booth downstairs, and I had all my £1 coins I was putting in just to ask how the reception of the film is. And he told me, where are you right now? I said, I'm here, I'm standing on Marble Arch. And he said, do you go buy yourself something big? Your film's a huge hit. And I started weeping in the middle of that phone booth because I was like, say that again. He said, your film's a blockbuster. I said, people like it. He said, I don't know if they like it, but they're coming to see it. And I went up, and meanwhile my mother, who had become like Jaga Jasoos, who was staring at everybody from the window thinking that everybody in London wants to attack me. And I don't know if she was really happy or not, but we had a little bit of a family meltdown moment. When I told her, I said, Mummy, the movie's a big hit. So she's like, oh my God, you think that underworld man will call us again? And I was like, so it was a lot of Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham going on in that moment. But at that point I realized that, oh my God, I have a career. Like, you know, I did it at 25. I made this film, and I'm so excited that now I don't have to kind of go to my plan B. You know, it was like it was something for a confused, nervous, overweight, doesn't know where to go child. I finally had a career, and I said, okay, even if I mess up after this, at least they'll remember me for my first film. I think I messed up a fair amount after that, but I'm still only remembered for Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, but I'm still proud of it and really excited.
But Karan, how different is the industry today? Is it harsher, more professional, less warm? What is the change since you made Kuch Kuch?
It's so much has changed. It's detached. That's the word I have to use. It's corporate, it's detached, it's over-ambitious, it's not personal anymore. When I started making movies in '98, there was the slight shift had begun. But when I hear stories of the 60s, 70s and 80s about how people made movies, even before that, the golden era before that, the warmth, the personal nature of things, the interrelationship between filmmakers, music composers, artists, the fun that everyone had, we don't have that. There's a lot of artificiality. There's a lot of like corporate governance that makes us more hardcore, more cutthroat. I don't feel like you can make the kind of relationships that people did in the 40s and 50s and post that and subsequently. Today, I think if you have one single friend in the movie industry, you should be fortunate. Someone who really loves and cares for you and is as positive about your positivities. You should be blessed. It's not a country, it's not a, sorry, well, it is both ways. It's not a country or an industry of friendships. Unfortunately, and I don't say that as a cynic, I say that as a realist. And so if you're scoping for close friendships and intimate bonds in the fraternity, then I think you're looking in the wrong place. Unfortunately, there's nothing anyone can do about that. That is the order of the times. If you try to break that, you might lose the race. So it's a bit of a dichotomy, because while you want to handle your personal life, you don't want to let go of your professional status or existence. So all I really tell people is like, work. Keep your eye on the ball. Keep your focus on what you're going to achieve and put out there as content, because that's the only thing that will last. Who's friend and who slept with who and who loves who, and all that is so seasonal. Relationships are like mangoes, they come and go.
So how many friends do you actually have in the industry? Friends?
That's a trick question. It's like a trick question, because I don't know, I don't have a number, I have experiences. So I count those, I don't count those. I count the past much more than I count the present.
And from the past?
Many. I don't know how many of them have survived. Some of them have, some of them have fallen off the wayside. But I like to treat those as memories and not give closure to anything, because you never know who comes back into your life.
Are you referring to Shah Rukh Khan?
Shah Rukh Khan is very much a part of my family. He's not fallen off any wayside. He and his wife and family are pretty much family. Yes, I don't deny there have been ups and downs, but the connect is so strong. The love that I have for him and his family is so deep that I don't think anything can take away from that. Every relationship, like every family, goes through its own fair share of hurdles, but it doesn't take away from the core love that exists. There are others that are definitely not in my life anymore, but Shah Rukh and his wife and his 3 children are a large part of my life today.
I have to just say one quick thing here. When I used to go and meet Karan, sometimes at his office, I mean, I'm sure you've been to the Dharma office, so what he's talking about, this whole warmth, etc., it may not be there in the rest of the industry, I don't know, I have no experience, but I can tell you that in Karan's office, it's very easy and nice and fun, and currently wandering around, and somebody will wander into his room, and then they'll cut a cake because it's someone's birthday, and it's
and the best sandwiches in Mumbai from Candies are always a phone call away.
Lovely atmosphere and mood, and very relaxed and a lot of fun. I don't know, I'm sure it's still like that.
So who would you say, Karan, right now, there have been super hits like Bajirao Mastan. You didn't have the best relationship with the maker of Bajirao Mastan, but I think it's all good now, and a lot of the film industry is about relationships in flux, and you've dealt with all of it fantastically. I mean, he's one of the most popular people in the movie business, and you have talked about relationships in the book quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there have been ups and downs. Like Sanjay Bansali and me have been friends, and then we were not, and then we hugged and made up, and we're behaving like really like 2 spoiled children. It's okay, we're fine. I think I'm too old. I'm 43. I don't want to fight with anyone. Ram Gopal Verma's fights were just for fun. He's also, I think my fights with him also nobody's interested in anymore. And I think the 2 of us, I think, are completely cool with each other. So I'm looking for a new filmmaker to fight with. It keeps the energy going, I think. It keeps you in the news. I don't have an affair that I can talk about, extramarital that I can really boast about. I don't know. I don't have children that I can pose with for the paparazzi. I'm me and my black jacket that goes everywhere. So I think I'm looking for scandal. And if scandal doesn't knock on my door, then I will go and approach it on my own. Because that's the way it is. We're in the business of show business, and what the hell, I want to be in Pink Villa every day. I want Miss Malini to track me on a daily basis. So I really want that. I love this industry. I love the public eye. I love walking on a red carpet. I have no problem with it. I like to pose. I like to pout. I'll give my left profile because Gautam Rajadaksh told me in my first photo session that, darling, don't show your right to the world. So I mean, I love it. I love this movie business. I'm such a proud part of it. I feel like, why should I be apologetic? I don't want to be apologetic. I want to enjoy what comes with the territory. I don't mind. I'll go to the opening of an envelope if you invite me, as long as the media exists.
What is it about the movie business that you don't like, that you'd like to see changed?
What I don't like delusion. I think it's a big disease. Like, I think everyone thinks more of themselves than they really are, and that bothers me to no end. When I walk into a meeting, I want to give them like an email and say, no, you are not such a big star. A. Secondly, you are charging too much, you are retarded. 3, your agent stinks. 4, your office stinks as well. Like, I want to say things, but the bubble in my head is just put aside, and I have to say, hey, you're a movie star, you're great. I love the fact that you're fantastic. But I don't know, I sometimes feel like I want to send emails to people and tell them what they really are. Because yes, I'm not the most talented filmmaker at all, far from it. I'm not the slimmest person, far from it. I don't have the visual sense Sanjay Bansali has. No, I don't have it. I don't have the storytelling Rajkumar Hirani has. No, I don't. But what I have, they don't. And you have to know.
And what is that?
Oh God, that'll be like blowing my trumpet, and that's one thing I don't want to blow.
Go ahead. We have a whole orchestra to back you up.
No, look, I have a sense of joie de vivre on celluloid that has its urban syntax that I think that I crack quite well. I have an understanding of deep layers of human relationships because I come from a messed up mind sometimes, so I get complexes in human dynamics that I've shown in films like Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna, and probably in my coming film Ae Dil Hai Mushkil that will walk the grey path where it comes to human dynamics. But I don't have certain, like, I know that these are things that I can own, but what I can't and I don't want to, because I don't think I have those qualities. And that's why when people say, oh, when will you make a film like Anurag Kashyap or like Dibakar Banerjee, and I'm like, I don't know how to. Like, I really don't know how to make a film that is dwelling on a path that I don't understand. Like when I saw Gangs of Wasseypur, yes, I saw, and my mind was blown, but I was like, I won't reach that location only he shot in. You know, forget doing that, you know. It was like, I won't know how to get there, and why should I apologize?
But you participated in a collaborative
Bombay Talkies.
Bombay Talkies.
It was my idea of getting that critic's thumbs up. I'm like, I'm going to make an art film. So I'm going to make a film that is going to be simple and completely hard-hitting in my way, and I'm going to try. So I was playing the Dibakar, Zoya and Anurag game, and I was like, listen, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I also want to be part of this gang. Why should I feel alienated? I did that for my own self. Like I said, why not? I should try it out. 27 minutes is not so tough. I don't think I can make a full-length feature film like that, but it was okay as a short.
Did you beat them at their own game, do you think, in that movie?
Dibakar's was better than mine. Mine was second best according to me. I gave myself the silver medal.
But you did create a new, a young new star who hasn't gone very far after that. He was fantastic in that movie.
Saqib, yeah. I mean, a lot of people, there was some kind of conjecture about like, oh, because he played a gay boy in the film, that is, I mean, that's redonkulous, which is my new word.
The conjecture being, would you like to spell it out?
That he played gay, that's why he hasn't managed to kind of, you know, kind of get more like kind of interesting. But I think he's a huge talent, and I think he deserves all, and he's doing a couple of interesting films now. And I was like, how can you just generalize the fact that an artist plays a gay man in a film should not limit his possibilities or her possibilities at all. It should empower them with those choices. The fact that he went out there and did it, I think everybody in Indian cinema should be proud that he actually pushed the envelope.
But do you think that the gay community within Bollywood is one of the better kept secrets, and they want to keep it a secret because of the laws being what they are in India? Is it just that?
Because you get tortured 377 times if you speak about it.
Have you voiced your feelings about Section 377?
Several times in my own way. I mean, we all signed that form, and we've all spoken about, you know, as it being as a hurdle that we need to kind of combat. I really appreciate someone like Shashi Tharoor's endeavors, you know, who from the governance went out there and pushed it, but of course the bill wasn't passed. And it was unfortunate, and I think the endeavor is on, and there is of course a silent force working behind the scenes to make sure that word is out there and that it can be. But you know, we're a third world country with so many problems that this is one of the many problems that people are fighting in their own way.
But do you think if that happens, if the bill gets passed, Bollywood will be a significantly different place? You'll be making significantly different movies. Our movie stars will be more upfront about their preferences, they'll dress differently, or will they also continue to stay in the closet? I mean,
nothing changes.
The whole community.
I believe, Shobha, you can change the way the governance thinks. You can go out there, there's a large section that will kind of go out there and fight for a cause. But what do you do about the man in a house, at the average man in this country whose sensibility is beyond your comprehension? How do you change that? You know, that is what you need to change much more, the grain, the DNA. That father has to understand that his son or his daughter has a preference. That mother has to support that choice. That needs to change more than just a bill in parliament. Until that change doesn't happen, the fabric of our morality doesn't change vis-a-vis that. It doesn't matter what bill you pass and what big dharna you do outside anywhere. till that my mental fabric doesn't change. And that's only going to change when there is a certain, when the arts definitely have a large impression. When I put out there on film or through a story or narrative that can change a little way that the human mind operates, I think we'll have won a tiny war, but it's a really long stay ahead. I don't blame people for remaining in the closet, because when they get out there, they have to face the world not in its best form. And it's something that I understand completely. And it's your personal choice. If you want to take on the world and the society around you, go out there and do it, and we'll all stand by you, and I'll be proud of your decision. But if you stay in, it's not something I would judge. And especially in the entertainment industry, let me tell you, the most I get shocked and surprised about how narrow-minded so many members of my own industry are.
I'm not surprised at all. We have limited time left, Poonam, Karan, and we can take questions from the audience. I'm sure there are, look at those hands going up, hundreds and hundreds of questions coming up. Do we have a mic? We're restricted to 5 questions.
And we're restricted to questions from the front because we can't get through the crowd.
Can we start with the person whose hand I can see? You'll have to come up front to ask that question, please. You'll have to come up front if you can. Or if you can't, because the aisles are totally blocked. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Well, let's just start with the young lady here.
Good evening.
We need a mic, please.
Yeah.
Oh, there's someone with
Good evening. Yeah, I'm Nishchal.
oh, right there. Yes. Do you want to get up and introduce yourself, please? Thank you. Okay.
Good evening, I'm Nishchal. Do you think yourself as a changed person after a book? Before, how were you before the book and after the book? Do you find yourself something different in your personality or in your way of working?
As I said earlier in the chat, that the book definitely opened up my mind, speaking about my life, my childhood, dreams, aspirations, hurdles, obstacles, everything. I think it was like, as I said, it was like therapy. So I definitely felt a lot more, I think, connected with myself. I didn't realize that there were some parts which I don't think even I could express to Poonam, that while I was speaking about was having a sense of, as I said, it was having a sense of catharsis within me. When you touch base with certain points of your childhood, because that's what any therapist or any psychologist will do, they always date you back to your growing up and impressionable years. So when I did speak about my childhood, I realized that it had definitely shifted something within me, and I feel a lot more, I would say a lot more open-minded today as a result of this book.
The lady here?
Hi, I'm Priyanshi,
Hi,
a
Priyanshi.
student. I've been studying in grade 11th. Well, I am indeed honored to, be here and talk to you. I'm going to take just a minute. It's been 3 years I've been writing a story, which I had an opportunity to present it to Smriti Shinde, in case Mission Sapne. Then I had an opportunity to provide it to Rohit Shetty.
What's the question, young lady?
Actually, ma'am, I have a story written which I've been struggling from last 3 years.
You can't pitch that.
No, I just wanted to.
No, there are a lot of people who really want to ask him questions about himself.
Just once.
That's not fair, my dear. It's about questions. This is not a
They're
platform
taking questions. You cannot be pitching your own story here. I'm sorry. We just have to move to the next person.
Hi, Karan.
Hi.
Okay, question is best film and worst film of yours according to you. And I just want to add one little thing. I can totally relate to the snooty Sobo attitude because I study in a Sobo college. So yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from.
My best film
Best
and
and
my
worst film, yeah.
My best, according to me, is Kabhi Alvida. I won't say worst because there's nothing that any art form creator should call his or her work as worst. My least favorite work is Student of the Year.
Any reason why, Karan? What did you like about it?
Holiday film. I wasn't pretending to make any kind of classic or moving any movie mountain there. It was to launch 3 newcomers, and they've done really well. So I think the purpose was served. I don't think it was me at my best.
But those 3 will be blessing you forever and ever, particularly Adi.
So I think, if you ask me what's the most like that came out of a film, it was Student of the Year. Definitely 3 supreme talents, and I'm really happy that I could gift them to the film industry.
The young lady in the blazer. And one more there. I'm sorry, but I can't send the mic to you. It's impossible.
Hello sir, my name is Khushbu and I'm from Presidency School, Ajmer.
Hi.
Sir, my question is, you have made movies of almost all genres. Which is the next genre you would like to choose for your movie?
I'm not very versatile, Khushbu. So I can't see myself shift genres in the next 4-5 years. It'll have songs, dance and some good-looking people, yeah. Just enjoy it now. I can't pretend that I'll be making a sci-fi thriller, not happening.
One question this side. Let's get a mic here, please. Thank you. Who's the one who's yelling?
Karan, hi.
Yeah.
Hi. You said you're looking for a new filmmaker. Are you looking for a new filmmaker?
Am I looking for a new filmmaker?
Yeah.
Why would I look for one?
You said you need a new filmmaker for you.
Sorry?
A filmmaker for you to work. A director?
Oh, are you offering your services?
Yes, please. I made a film as well.
Okay.
Next
I don't know.
question, please. A question.
India's Got Talent.
This is not a sales conference. Let's get a question in. Which one? Where is she? The lady with the glasses was... And after the young man, the lady with the glasses.
Yes, I am Yajiranan from Scindia School. I wanted to ask you about which is your favorite work? You like to be a producer or an actor or an anchor or a director?
Director is my primary passion. Everything else is a result of it.
And can I have one question also?
One more bit up behind you. I think
There's a lady waiting.
So I want to ask you regarding your plan B.
My plan B?
Yeah, which we discussed. Right.
Many there were. Plan B had 5 verticals.
Okay.
Hi, Karan, my name is Nishtha. I teach in Delhi University and I write on gender.
Right.
You talked about pushing the envelope when it comes to sexuality, but I am really upset to share that it's your films, Dharma production films that have come out with the most regressive portrayal of homosexuals. And it's extremely disturbing because coming from you have been pretty vocal about sexuality and being comfortable with it, and you've been an icon in that sense. And yet, the films have been, it leaves one with a bad taste in
If you're
mouth.
talking about a film like Dostana or Kal Ho Na Ho, you don't understand that I'm very proud of those films for the simple reason that I put up the concept of homosexuality in the mainstream, which was never addressed. You're talking about portrayal. Yes, we use humor sometimes as a crutch, because if you look around you, that's the only way things get understood. At least, and I will show you personally, if I do get the chance, not one but millions of emails that came to me from kids who told me that their parents were open to the concept and understood it for the first time as a result of mainstream Indian cinema. Sometimes you have to take a path that is more, I would say, relatable and understood in your own country for you to express and communicate. If I had made a small, tiny art house film with the right projection, which I did do in my omnibus endeavor, nobody would, the point would have not, at least homosexuality was spoken about regressively, progressively. Either it was a point of drawing room conversation. That's the first thing I did with Kal Ho Na Ho in 2003, with Dostana in 2008. Today, there's a streamline of many LGBT movies, and I can proudly tell you that the ball may have started rolling because of me, even if you may not have appreciated my endeavor.
I'm sorry, we are really hopelessly out of time. Karan, one final question. Coffee with Karan or chai pe charcha?
Unfortunately, I'm a coffee drinking person, so chai is not for me. It's always coffee because nothing stimulates you like coffee does.
Not a loaded remark there, or take it as you wish.
I don't mind. I reload, I load, I do whatever it takes.
Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic session.
Thank you. God bless you.
Fantastic audience. Thank you very much. Great audience. Thank you so much. Thank you, Karan. Thank you, Poonam. Lovely.
Once again, let's give a warm round of applause to Karan Johar, Poonam Saxena and Shobha Day. This session was presented by Z Entertainment. Now, Karan's book is going to be released in May, so he won't be doing signings this afternoon. Please do stick around here at the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls front lawns. We do have a book launch coming up. That book launch is You Can Be Smarter and Wiser by Meera Shenoy. It will be released by Namato Gokhale and Nipun Malhotra. That launch will be starting in about 10 minutes. Do stick around. Please, I will ask you to not crowd the guests. It becomes very uncomfortable for them when they're mobbed. Please do not crowd them.
Across boundaries, we believe in bringing the world together through entertainment. See Entertainment. Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. The world is my family. Across boundaries, we believe in bringing the world together through entertainment. See Entertainment. Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. The world is my family.
While we're between sessions, I'll take this moment to remind you about the music concerts held every night during the Jaipur Literature Festival at Clark's Amer Hotel. These concerts start at 7:30 and there is one tonight. The musicians are Yom and Wang Li. That's a duo between clarinet and Jew's harp, which is very high energy, very wonderful, quite unlike any other sound you will have heard before. And Kutli Khan, who is a staple here at the Z Jaipur Literature Festival. Those two performances will be on tonight at Clark's Amer from 7:30 p.m. Tickets are 400 rupees and you can buy those tickets on the door. We do invite you to come and join us and do some dancing to the fabulous music that's lined up tonight.
The Jaipur Literature Festival is the world's largest free festival of its kind. With daily interactive sessions, lively debate and dialogue, and international music performances every night, it's no wonder the festival attracts nearly 270,000 visitors a year. Since its inception in 2008, JLF has gone international with festivals along the banks of the London Thames and across the pond in Boulder, Colorado. Jaipur Bookmart is an international B2B event for the publishing industry. It runs parallel with the Z Jaipur Literature Festival. Teamwork also promotes the best in Indian theatre through the Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards, the only national platform that celebrates all the aspects of the craft from across India. The Going Solo International Theatre Festival is the first of its kind in India, bringing together award-winning single-actor performances from across the globe. While international touring productions such as Bollywood Extravaganza and Bollywood Love Story, a musical, have sold out shows across Europe, Egypt and Russia. Sounds of Freedom, the name says it all. A musical celebration of freedom of expression through workshops and outreach programs, Sounds of Freedom culminates in a live concert broadcast on television and online. The sacred celebrates the spiritual through music, movement and poetry. Teamwork Arts also produces numerous international festivals. These festivals showcase the best that Indian arts and culture has to offer. Teamwork's major nationwide festival is Delhi Live, a weekend carnival in the nation's capital.
Teamwork Arts and Capital Jazz present the Jazz Utsav. This is the definitive jazz festival featuring the best of talent from India and abroad.
For the young and the young at heart, the Ishara International Puppet Theatre Festival brings local and international performances to audiences across several Indian cities. While the Multi-City Kahani Festival features interactive storytelling sessions and workshops championing the power of imagination. Teamwork Arts, celebrating the arts. For more information, visit www.teamworkarts.com or follow us on Facebook.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the book launch here at the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls Front Lawn afternoon event. This book is titled You Can Be Smarter and Wiser by Meera Shenoy. I'll just tell you a little bit about the book and its author. You Can Be Smarter and Wiser is about the following. Management gurus tell us there are lessons to learn from inspirational lives, and that we do not have to wait a lifetime to integrate these lessons into our lives. The real-life stories profiled in this book cover entrepreneurs ranging from some in wheelchairs to blind persons who have built their businesses with zest and energy. It looks at CEOs who hire youth with disabilities and make products for this market because it makes business sense. And it celebrates those who have converted their disability into an opportunity to touch and transform other vulnerable lives. Mira Shenoy is a pioneer in skilling unprivileged youth, and she has worked in senior positions in the government, private sector, and in organizations such as the World Bank and the UNDP. Mira is the founder and chairperson of Youth for Jobs. So we will be launching her book today. The book will be released by Namita Gokhale and by Anurima Roy from Bloomsbury. But first of all, we're going to do a discussion between Mira Shenoy and a special guest, Nipun Malhotra. Please give them a warm round of applause.
So congratulations on the launch of this book, ma'am. It's a wonderful book. But what really, how did you really come up with the idea of this book, or what made you?
Actually, Nipun, 3 years back, I set up Youth for Jobs, which works on training youth with disabilities for jobs. In the process of training, we really worked hard to bring out the potential of these youth. I heard their stories every day in the classrooms as I traveled in Ranchi, in Mumbai, in Chennai, and I saw that they battled so many odds to be economically independent. I thought to myself that surely there must be some entrepreneurs also with disability. And thus when I traveled, I began doing research, and I discovered these amazing people whom I wrote about. For example, a young, irreverent, blind filmmaker, Anand Kulkarni, and his organization is called Flop Films. You would obviously want to know how he looks at, understands and captures emotions. Then I met Sabrine, a woman who runs an institute for global change makers in Kerala, and yet, yes, she's blind. Then I met these wheelchair entrepreneurs like Arvind Verma, who's in Delhi, who actually turned around a 1 crore loss-making company into a 365 crores empire. And people like Nipun here, who spends 60% of his time growing the organization and 40% of his time in advocacy for people like him. We just had Karan. I met this hazel-eyed Divya Arora. She has cerebral palsy. But if all of you have seen this film Guzarish and wondered how Hrithik Roshan gave such a realistic performance in the film, it's because of Divya Arora. And to quote her, what she told me, she said, I made Hrithik understand helplessness, how to place his hands, since he cannot remove the fly sitting on his nose. I actually 25 times till he perfected the act. So these are the stories which I've narrated, Nipun, in the book.
Right. Now you've covered a lot of inspiring stories of people with disabilities who've beaten the odds. But is there any common thread that links all of them?
I find 3 common threads running through the book. One is that all of them accept their condition. The other is that they face tremendous challenges all along, yet it doesn't prevent them from dreaming big and working hard to achieve these dreams. For example, talking of acceptance of conditions, Raghu Shenoy, who's a IT entrepreneur in Bangalore, told me, he said, my IT colleagues sit on wooden chairs. I sit on a wheelchair. Now that's the only difference. The sun shines on us, the grass is green for all of us. And then he went on to tell me that his mother said, there's only one answer to the question, how are you? And that's fine, thank you. So yes, I sit on a wheelchair, but my shoes last much longer. So that's the positive spirit. Sabrina, in fact, thinks being blind makes her think differently and therefore give her a competitive advantage. I'll never forget what she narrated to me. She said she went to an Indian school for the blind and she asked the children, can you describe to me the beauty of blindness? She says there was stunned silence because no one had spoken about the beauty of blindness. And then to quote her, she says, finally one young boy piped up. And he said, I can read under the blanket in the night without my mother knowing, and no one else can do it. So that's his competitive advantage. There's this other person, Sanjay Dang. Now he's a very well-known travel agent, now a friend. And he told me he has evolved skills which are normal for a blind person, but a surprise to us. It's a fact, he says, that I have enhanced memory retention and recall. I'm better with information. Phone numbers and addresses come very naturally to me. I recognize voices better than others. No wonder then that clients reach for him rather than his sighted colleagues. Some take the disability more philosophically, like this Amit Manga. He's young like Nipun. I think you know him, Nipun.
Yeah, very well, yeah.
Yeah. So he told me, he says, I realize what absolute happiness is and what relative happiness is. This has made me humble, compassionate, and most importantly, helped me to discover my ability in my disability. So as I said, there are lots and lots and lots of challenges which they faced in work and in personal life. For example, Arvind Verma, an accident, he fell as a schoolboy and he became a paraplegic when he was 14. He was working in PricewaterhouseCoopers, but he decided to leave his job. He says, I realized I must burn my boats with no safety net. His father told him that there was no cushion to fall back on and he should not try hard to turn this 1 crore loss-making industry. He had to struggle. The workers would not accept a youngster on a wheelchair, as you know. The union leaders used to defy him using crude language. The finances were a mess. Personally, he had to travel a lot, and once actually the airline put him on a Delhi flight instead of a Mumbai flight, or a security guard told him to stand up when he is not able to do that for the security check. But however, how he turned around and made this, and how everything is happy now, you must read my book. I met Nipun in the atrium of the ISB, where he was attending, you remember this course on family management. He told me, and maybe he could, say some of those things. He told me that at a pub, if he orders a drink, the bearer looks at his friend for approval because he can't believe that he can order his own drink. Or when he's interviewing staff, they don't actually look at him because they can't believe. He said it's out and out hilarious that they refuse to believe a wheelchair person can actually be in a position of influence. I'm going to ask him to narrate that. Would you narrate that incident where a vice president of a marketing company refused to cooperate? And what happened?
No, that was more at an industrial expo where I had to make a deal for bearings that we had to buy in bulk for a particular product, and it was an auto component expo, and I went to this particular bearing company that had a stall there, and I was really shocked to see how their attitude was, because they felt that I do not really have the power to buy bearings, so they completely ignored me while they looked at other aspiring buyers, and what they did not realize is that I lost out a big order because of the way they treated me at that particular point of time. So that happens all the time.
And what happened? He lost the order.
He of course lost the order. It's also happened at interviews on the other side, where I'm on the interview panel and we are interviewing people. Even if I ask a question, the person on the other side, who's the interviewee and the applicant, he doesn't make eye contact with me because he thinks the wheelchair users doesn't have that power to.
Yeah. So this is the challenge, and yet despite the challenges, all of them dream big. Divya Arora, who runs the entertainment company, she told me now she's written a film script called Pyar Actually, which is with Nagesh Kukunur. She says it's a commercial feature film, completely written, acted, and she hopes to direct it also. Her fingers are deformed actually, so the typing took her 2 long years. But she says it's not impossible, you see. Then I met this weedy, short Ajit Babu, who's a serial entrepreneur with cerebral palsy. And he said something remarkable to me. He said, all my life I've rebelled against security. It's too boring. A two-wheeler, then two more wheels in a swift car, then a wife, then a children, then a house. Can you live life like that? I don't mind taking risks because I want to achieve something bigger. And he adds, I'm ambitious. I'm thinking of Tesla. If every startup can solve one problem in the world, we can all leave behind a better place. I always seem to end up with Sabrina because she really has such global ambitions. Her words still ring in my ear. When I saw her, she had just come back from a swim in the lake and she swims well, she rides on horseback, and this is what she told me. She said, I'm not interested in candles that flicker. I'm not interested in candles that flicker. We want to build fires. Fires that burn for a long time. That will usher global change. So it's amazing the kind of dreams they all have, and they work persistently towards the dreams.
But there are very inspiring books on disability that come out on beating the odds, but this one is clearly different. How would you like to tell the audience on how it's relevant to each one of us sitting here?
While the stories of disability, the book is meant for all of us, because in all of us there lies infinite potential, but most of us don't bother to ignite it. Either we are lazy or we just feel it's not important enough. I think when we read these stories in this book, every one of us feels inspired and says, oh, we are so fortunate. If they can do it, so we can. And that's why it's called, that section is called, I can, so can you.
You originally were going to only cover disabled entrepreneurs, but you then decided to have a second section of the book too.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about the second section and why it came up?
The first section of the book profiles entrepreneurs. The second section is wise leaders show the way. So it speaks about leaders like Pattu Keswani, who's the chairman of the Lemon Tree Hotel, who's building the world's most silent hotel, completely manned by the deaf. He says, we never ask, is it possible? Lage raho is our motto, and that's how we succeed. There's Niren Chowdhury, who heads the global operations of KFC now. When he returned to India, he realized he had a wide canvas to paint on, but he was clear he wanted to combine business and ambition together, business and compassion together. So to quote Niren, he says, I thought my dream is if I cannot control what India is, surely I can control what Yum India is. So why don't we make our company the country we wish to see? We've also covered young entrepreneurs like Smriti. I don't know whether she's here. She works with deaf artists, and in the book I don't have photographs. Actually, deaf artists, with her help, did all the sketches of the book, and they've captured each personality so beautifully. Then there's this 26-year-old Kalyani Kona, who I don't know whether you know her. She's actually built a lovability app because she believes that no one should be condemned to a life of loneliness unless it's a choice. So we invite all of you readers to think for yourself when you read the stories. What are the opportunities you offer to others? How do you become a better leader and leave behind a better world?
On that note, I'd like to invite Festival Director Namita Gokhale to the stage to say a few words.
That was a most enlightening talk. It's a pleasure, it's an honor to be here for the launch of your thoughtful book, this very timely reminder. As we reflect upon disability, it's important to remember we are all disabled in different and particular ways. And the sum total of a society's success is indeed the orchestration of its hurts, its failings, its disabilities. I lost the use of my wrist 2 months ago, And I realized how important something as simple as a wrist is for everything. Today I've lost my voice, and we just remember everything, and people who carry on and succeed are to be deeply, deeply, deeply respected, as they are inspirational. And also talking about persons with disability who've excelled as entrepreneurs, and your pragmatic roadmap in profiling CEOs who have integrated disabilities into the business is to be congratulated. And thank you, both of you, for being here with us at the Jaipur Literature Festival 2016. Thank you.
Yeah, I now invite Anurima Roy from Bloomsbury to come up on stage and for the book to be released.
Switch it on now. Why it is on?
Let's give them a round of applause. Congratulations to Meera Shenoy. Thank you so much, Nipun Malhotra, Namita Gokhale, and Anurima Roy. Our next session here at the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls front lawn will commence in 10 minutes. That session is A Spy Among Friends, Philby and the Great Betrayal. That session is featuring Bern McIntyre, and he will be introduced by Raghu Karnad. The session is part of the Indian Quarterly Presents the Privacy series. That will be commencing in about 10 minutes. For those of you interested, Meera Shenoy will be signing books in the far left corner of the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls front lawn. Just look out for the red and white tent, that is the book signing area. I'll run you through what's happening in the other venues as well for this last session of the day. In Charbagh, the session is a brief history of 7 killings. In the Google Mogul tent, it's Farewell Kabul, from Afghanistan to a more dangerous world. In Baitak, the session going in now is called Parallax. In the Mahindra Humanities Centre, Durbar Hall, it's Viceroy. And in Fort Samvad, it's Poetry Hour with Kavita Niranta. Here at the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls front lawn, the next session is A Spy Among Friends. Do stick around. We're just about ready to go on with A Spy Among Friends, Philby and the Great Betrayal, but I have a couple of announcements to make prior to that. The first one concerns the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls 6-word story contest result. If you have been involved in that, if you have submitted a story today over at the Rajnigandha Lounge at the back of the lawn here, your ears will be picking up. We have a winner. The winner's name is Pratik Sharma. Pratik Sharma, are you in the audience? No? I'll try again later. Pratik Sharma's story in 6 words is Sea of Heads, Walking on Words, which I think we agree is pretty great. So Pratik, if you're listening to this, please collect your gift from the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls Lounge by 5:30. I'll try to make this announcement again a little later. Also, just a very quick message. The session that was going into the Baitak Parallax with Shazia Sikandar in conversation with Homi K. Babha, that session has been cancelled. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Ben McIntyre and Raghu Karnad for the session A Spy Among Friends, Philby and the Great Betrayal. This session is part of the Indian Quarterly Presents the Privacy series. Let's give them another welcome.
Thank you. The great spy novelist John le Carré once wrote about the privately educated Englishman that he is the greatest dissembler on earth. Nobody will charm you so glibly, disguise his feelings for you better, or cover his tracks more skillfully. So it should come as no surprise that these Englishmen thrived in the world of modern espionage. And not one of them thrived, literally not one embodied these traits and skills of the privately educated Englishman as well as Kim Philby. This is a man who rose into the commanding ranks of MI6 at the height of the Cold War, even came to lead the counterintelligence efforts against the Soviet Union, and all the while remained a dedicated communist and served as a double agent, served Moscow. And there is no better person to tell this story than Ben McIntyre, who is the most renowned chronicler of the business of modern espionage, the author of some classics of the genre, including Agent Zigzag and Operation Mincemeat, and who has now come at last to this tale of the man who was the paragon of the arts of deceit, Kim Philby. A Spy Among Friends. It's a story of smoke and mirrors, of ideology and patriotism, of sex and liquor in copious quantities, and it's a story that has been turned into biographies before. But what distinguishes A Spy Among Friends, what distinguishes Ben's biography of Kim Philby is that he reveals the psychology of the double agent, the psychology of deceit and treachery, and this mysterious constancy that lies underneath them, not through the way that Kim Philby betrayed his country, but through the way that he deceived his friends, his lifelong intimates, and his closest companions. And foremost among them, making a trio that Ben follows through the book, are Nicholas Elliott, his colleague in MI6, and James Angleton, his great defender and supporter in the CIA. So I won't go on. I'll cut straight to the perfect line that Ben has chosen for the epigraph to this book, which is the famous line by E.M. Forster. If I had to choose between betraying my country and betraying my friends, I hope I should have the guts to betray my country. And from there, Ben will lead us into the question, what would move a man to do both? Ben McIntyre.
Thank you very much indeed. It's lovely to be back in Jaipur. I was last here 4 years ago for the festival. My, how you've all grown. Thank you for having me back. Now, a small test of whether this works. Marvellous. No, that way. Brilliant. As Raghu said, the story of Philby has been told many times before. In fact, the Philby ground is probably the best tilled of any of the spy stories. But it's usually told, the Philby story, as a tale of politics and ideology, purely as those. What I propose to offer you today is a very different take on the Philby story. It's really a story of male friendship of a very particular time and a very particular place. And it's about Englishness, a very old-fashioned sort of Englishness. It's a story that takes place for the most part in comfortable clubs in London. But in many ways it is really the defining story of the Cold War. And it begins with a character that most people have never heard of. His name was Nicholas Elliot, and he was a pure child of upper-class British privilege. He was patriotic, he was loyal, he was God-fearing, and he was almost totally uninterested in politics. His father was Provost of Eton, Britain's most famous and most exclusive public school, which meant that Nicholas Elliot not only went to Eton, he actually lived in Eton and was brought up in Eton. I nearly said Eden there, which was exactly how he saw it. And he was a pure product of that particular place. He grew up as, in a way, into the perfect example of the quotation that Raghu just gave you from John le Carré, the sort of shy, reserved, and deeply deceptive Englishman. Nobody will charm you more glibly, disguise his feelings from you better, cover his tracks more skillfully, or find it harder to confess to you that he's a damned fool. He can have a forced 12 nervous breakdown while standing next to you in the bus queue, and you may be his best friend, and you'll never be any the wiser. Elliot was, in many ways, a born keeper of secrets. In 1938, he joined the Foreign Office and was posted to The Hague as an honorary attaché, but he'd already conceived the ambition to become a spy. Why he wanted to become a spy was largely based on the fact that he'd read an awful lot of spy novels. And thought that it would be good fun, which indeed it turned out to be. He also simply had a word with a friend of his father, Sir Robert Van Sittart, who just happened to be the Foreign Secretary. And Van Sittart simply arranged it. It was as simple as that, from one day to the next. It was the old boy network in operation. During the war, Elliot worked mostly in the Dutch section of MI6, operating secret agents in occupied Holland. But his closest friend was a man you see here called Basil Fisher, who plays a very short part in this story, but an important one. Fisher was a Hurricane pilot and Elliot's oldest friend from Eton, who was shot down and killed during the Battle of Britain. Elliot was recovering from this extremely traumatic experience when, a few weeks later, he met another new recruit to the secret world. This one, a product of Westminster School, a fellow graduate from Cambridge, from Trinity College, and a man who would define the rest of Elliot's life. His name was Harold Adrian Russell Philby, better known as Kim. This is one of several Indian connections, in fact, to this story. Philby was named Kim because he was born in Ambala, while his father was here as a colonial administrator. And he was called Kim. He was nicknamed Kim because of his ability to speak pretty fluent Hindi at a very young age because of his ayah, his nanny here. And so, like Kim in the Rudyard Kipling story, he had sort of two sides to his head. And of course, unbeknown to his father, who bestowed the nickname, he would end up being, like Kim in the Kipling story, a spy. Philby was a very glamorous figure in wartime London. He'd been a war correspondent for the Times, and of course there's no more glamorous posting than that. During the Spanish Civil War, he'd been wounded by a Republican shell and personally decorated by Franco. By the time he met Elliot, he had joined MI6, Britain's intelligence service, and was working in the counterintelligence section, Section 5. In 1941, Philby and Eliot found themselves working side by side. Philby was responsible for the Iberian Peninsula in counterintelligence, while Eliot was still running agents in occupied Holland. Eliot's description of life in MI6 is very telling. He wrote, "It was an organization in which a large proportion of one's colleagues, male and female, were personal friends. A sort of convivial camaraderie prevailed, rather like a club, in which we all called each other by our first names and saw a lot of each other outside the office. In many ways, this is a story about clubs. It's about very exclusive groups of mostly male bonding units which share or believe they share certain traits. Philby and Eliot bonded immediately. The word most consistently used to describe Kim Philby is charm. That intoxicating, beguiling, and occasionally lethal English quality. Philby loved to laugh, and he loved to drink, and he loved to listen with deep sincerity and rapt curiosity. One of his contemporaries said of him, "Philby was the sort of man who won worshippers. You didn't just like him, admire him, agree with him, you worshipped him." Now, another who came to worship Philby at this time was James Jesus Angleton. He was an Anglophile American who arrived with the OSS in London, the American forerunner of the CIA. Angleton was half Mexican, very eccentric, an amateur poet, and an orchid enthusiast. And the three men struck up the closest possible friendship. It was founded on cricket, drinks, lots of them, and set-piece jokes of a rather unfunny sort, we would find them today, the sort of actress and the bishop jokes. But they bonded deeply. One day in 1941, Philby travelled to a park in North London where he handed over a briefcase to a man who shook his hand and then vanished into the night. The case contained dozens of handwritten documents, including a detailed description of the work of British counterintelligence. One of the documents, which you see here, read as follows: Mr. Nicholas Eliot, 24, 5 foot 9 inches, brown hair, prominent lips, black glasses, ugly, and rather pig-like to look at. Good brain, good sense of humour, likes a drink, and was recently very ill, and now as a consequence drinks little. He is in charge of Holland. Nicholas Eliot would have been astonished to read that note, and still more amazed to discover that the man hurrying away into the night with the bundle of papers was an officer of the NKVD, the predecessor of the KGB, Stalin's intelligence agency. Eliot would have been utterly flabbergasted to know that Kim Philby, his closest friend, was an experienced Soviet spy of 8 years standing, codenamed Sonny. Now, at this moment, I need to reel you back a decade to Cambridge in the 1930s. There, the violent ideological current sweeping the university had created a vortex which quickly swept up Philby and many other clever, angry, alienated young men. Philby made friends on the political left, and some on the extreme left. Fascism was on the march in Europe, and only communism, it seemed to many, could oppose it. Late at night, over copious drinks, in panelled rooms, students argued, debated, tried on one ideological costume or another, and in a small handful of cases, embraced violent revolution. The most significant, and certainly the most colourful, of Philby's radical new friends was Guy de Montcy Burgess, amoral, homosexual, witty, supremely dangerous, and loud in his advocacy of communism. Another friend was Donald Maclean, a clever young linguist destined for the Foreign Office. These three men would form the core of what would later be called the Cambridge Spy Ring. Philby joined the Cambridge University Socialist Society. He canvassed on behalf of the Labour Party, But there was no sudden conversion, no revolutionary epiphany. Yet, by the time he emerged from Cambridge, Philby was utterly committed to communism. In the autumn of 1933, he travelled to Vienna, ostensibly to improve his German, before applying to the Foreign Office. In reality, he wanted to take part in the battle between left and right that was then furiously underway in the Austrian capital. There he met and fell in love with Litzi Friedman, a fully committed communist revolutionary and a key person in this story whose reality has never really been revealed before. She was, as I say, a fully committed communist. She was already in contact with Soviet intelligence, and she was also, according to one contemporary source, a tremendous little sex pot. Philby seems to have lost his virginity and the last of his ideological commitment to Britain at almost exactly the same moment. As I say, Litzi was already in touch with Soviet intelligence, and they'd only been in Austria for a few weeks when Dollfuss, the fascist leader of Austria, moved to crush the leftist movement. Litzi was on a wanted list and the police were closing in, so Philby very swiftly married her in a registry office in Vienna Town Hall and then headed to London. It was Litzi who introduced Philby to a man called Arnold Deutsch. Deutsch was a brilliant and charismatic recruiter for the NKVD, for Stalin's intelligence service. And when he asked Philby if he wanted to work secretly for communism, Philby didn't hesitate at all. He said, "You do not hesitate to join an elite force." This is one of the keys to Philby, and also one of the odder aspects of him is that although he was a lifelong communist, he was also a tremendous snob. And he loved the idea of belonging to an extremely exclusive club. It doesn't get much more exclusive than the KGB, particularly if you happen to be working in Britain. Philby joined The Times, distinguished himself as a foreign correspondent, and was one of only a handful of journalists to join the British Expeditionary Force to France at the outbreak of World War II. You see here a photograph of Philby standing next, he is on the right, on our left, of General Gort, who was the overall commander of the British Expeditionary Force, which gives you an idea of just how much access Philby was already getting to the highest echelons of the British top brass. And bear in mind, he was already sending regular reports now back through Deutsch to the NKVD. At the start of the war, Philby had been told by Deutsch to get himself recruited by MI6. And he began dropping rather unsubtle hints to anyone he thought might be connected with the British intelligence service. Hester Marsden Smedley was one of them, the wonderfully named Hester Marsden Smedley. She was the chief foreign correspondent of the Daily Express. Her husband was rumoured to be linked to MI6 correctly. They ended up in a train carriage coming back from Dunkirk, and Philby dropped one of his hints, and she picked it up immediately and said he would be far better off doing secret work, and he agreed. A few days later, he was sitting down to tea in a London hotel with another formidable woman called Marjorie Maxey. Now, Marjorie Maxey had two main jobs. By day, she was a fundraiser for the Tory party, and during the afternoons and the evenings, she was a recruiter for Section D of MI6. D stands for destruction. That was the main sabotage unit of MI6. She's actually worth a biography on her own, I think. They got on tremendously well, and at the end of tea time, Marjorie Maxey asked Philby whether he would it sounds like a scene out of Monty Python, this. I mean, she asked Philby whether he would like to join the Secret Service, and he said he thought that would be very nice. The only vetting process that seems to have taken place involved a conversation with the deputy head of MI6, a man called Valentine Vivian, who was asked about Philby and who said, "I know his people." And that was that. That was the only vetting process that went on. It's almost a perfect definition of the way the British Old Boy network used to work. So that is how Kim Philby and Nicholas Elliott ended up side by side working together in MI6, fighting shoulder to shoulder ostensibly, but in reality on very different sides of a huge ideological chasm. At the end of the war, towards the end of the war in 1944, Elliott was deployed to Turkey, where he married his secretary, Elizabeth Holberton. There's rather a tradition of marrying your secretary in MI6. You see them here on their wedding day. A year later, after he'd arrived in Istanbul, Elliot pulled off the most incredible intelligence coup. He managed to recruit a German intelligence officer called Erich Vermehren. And now, Turkey was neutral during the war, but it was a hotbed of spies, and obviously Vermehren and Elliot were on opposite sides. Vermehren was a Catholic aristocrat with great misgivings about the Nazi project, and it was Elliot who managed to reel him in as a sort of defector to Britain. Vermehren was brought back to Britain, debriefed in Philby's mother's flat in London, in Kensington. Now, the defection of Vermehren actually crippled the Abwehr, the German military intelligence organization. It was hailed as a major blow against Nazi Germany because Vermehren brought with him a lot of extremely important secrets. And Elliot, briefly, was the toast of MI6 for having brought him in. But there was another aspect to this story. Vermehren's list of German notables Vermehren brought with him a list of German notables who were opposed to communism and might help build an anti-Bolshevik Germany after the war. Now, for obvious reasons, MI6 did not pass this list on to Moscow, to our allies in Moscow, but Kim Philby did. And when the Red Army swept into East Germany, they brought with them a ready-made list of anti-communists. When MI5 went looking for them after the war, every person on Vermehren's list had vanished. It was the first of Philby's bloodletting operations. His second occurred very soon afterwards. In 1946, a young Russian intelligence officer called Konstantin Volkov turned up at the British consulate in Istanbul and announced that he would like to defect as well. His price was £50,000 and an air ticket to London for he and his wife. The case made quite a slow progress to London, where it landed on the desk of Kim Philby. Kim Philby by this point had risen within MI6 to become head of Soviet counterintelligence. So Kim Philby was now in charge of hunting people like Kim Philby. When the Volkov case landed on his desk, Philby realized very quickly that it represented a really serious threat to himself, because Volkov might well know about Philby as a double agent. And so he moved very, very swiftly. He headed to Istanbul himself. He took over the case personally. In the meantime, he made contact through his Russian handlers with Moscow. And by the time he arrived in Istanbul, Volkov, needless to say, had vanished. We now know that Volkov was intercepted by two Russian hitmen. He was injected with a sleeping drug. He was wrapped in bandages with his wife and put on a plane to Moscow, where he was tortured in the cells of the Lubyanka and then executed. He was also expunged from history. There is no trace of Konstantin Volkov or any members of his family. By 1949, when this photograph was taken, Philby was a rising star within MI6 and tipped to become the head of that organization. It was at this point, as a kind of build-up to that expected appointment, that he was sent to Washington, D.C. as station chief, as head of MI6 in Washington, in the American capital. There, he swiftly established contact with all the key intelligence operatives in Washington, D.C., and most importantly, this is a photograph of the embassy in Istanbul where Volkov put himself in. That's Philby and Elliot in later life. That's Philby sailing to Washington, D.C., and that is his key contact in Washington, D.C., James Jesus Angleton, who now returns to our story as head of CIA counterintelligence. Angleton probably knew more about rooting out Soviet spies than anybody else in America. The two men began meeting every week, and sometimes twice a week, at a restaurant in Washington called Harvey's. There they discussed every aspect of Anglo-American intelligence. CIA interventions in Greece and Turkey to hold back communism, covert operations in Iran, the Baltics and Guatemala, secret American plans in Chile, Cuba, Angola, and Indonesia. During those long boozy lunches and dinners, as one fellow officer wrote many years later, Philby picked Angleton clean. Absolutely everything he extracted from him was sent directly back to Moscow. Virtually every clandestine CIA operation was known about at Moscow Center, where the KGB operated. I'll give you just one, perhaps the most famous example of a whole slew of betrayals carried out by Philby. This was called misnamed Operation Valuable. Enver Hoxha, Albania's hard-time Stalinist leader, you see him here. Albania was seen as an ideal target for anti-communist subversion. Viewed from London and Washington, it appeared ready to shake off communism. The idea was very simple for Operation Valuable. Trained guerrillas would be slipped into the country to link up with local rebel groups, eventually sparking a civil war and toppling Hoxha. If Albanian communism was successfully undermined, it was believed this would set off a chain reaction that would roll back the tide of Soviet imperialism. So, starting in 1948, Britain and then America began recruiting and then training Albanian exiles and sending these armed insurgents into Albania. Philby was central to the planning process. He passed everything onto Moscow. Every single one of the people you see in this photo was killed within hours of landing in Albania. For each guerrilla who was killed, as many as 40 others, friends and relatives, were shot or thrown into prison. The level of Philby's intelligence as passed on to Moscow and then passed back to Albania was so detailed that some of these landing anti-communist guerrillas were actually greeted by name when they parachuted into Albania. We'll never know the exact butcher's bill for Operation Valuable, but it certainly runs into the hundreds and possibly the thousands. But the end was coming for Philby, and it came in the exceedingly disreputable shape of Guy Burgess. Guy Burgess was now rising within the Foreign Office. Quite how he managed to rise remains one of the mysteries, because he was constantly in trouble. His record was not so much checkered as actively blotched. He was usually drunk. He conducted very public homosexual affairs more or less all the time. But in 1951 he was appointed information officer at the British Embassy in Washington, despite being one of the most indiscreet men on the planet. It was hoped that he might be less conspicuous there. But the Foreign Office Chief of Security warned the MI5 chief in Washington to expect him that with Burgess in town he should be prepared for even worse escapades. And Memo came back, what does he mean worse? Goats? As I say, by this point though, the net was beginning to close in on the Cambridge spies, actually through cryptography, through cryptanalysis. During the war, America and Britain had gathered most of the cables that were flying around the world, heavily encrypted, sent to and from Soviet embassies. But it wasn't until now, in 1951, that they managed to start breaking these codes. They were called the Venona transcripts. One of them revealed that there had been a spy, a Soviet spy, a communist spy, operating in the British Embassy in Washington in 1943. Now, this person was codenamed Homer, and they only had a very little bit of information about him, but the hunt for Homer began very seriously in 1951. Philby was told about the hunt for Homer in his capacity as head of MI6 in Washington, and he very quickly worked out that Homer could only be one person, and that had to be his old friend Donald Maclean, who had been an important figure in the Washington Embassy at that time and was privy to all the key secrets. Now, Philby also worked out that if the net closed on Maclean, it would also close pretty quickly on him. And so he decided to get Guy Burgess to fly back to London to warn Maclean that he was in serious trouble and that he needed to run for Moscow, otherwise they were all going to be in trouble. And the last thing Philby said to Burgess when he left was, whatever you do, Guy, don't you go to Moscow too. Because then, of course, it would point back to Philby even more strongly. And of course, as we all know, Maclean and Burgess skipped to Moscow. And as Philby had anticipated, the net began to close very swiftly around Philby. Here you see the wanted poster that was put up for Maclean and Burgess in embassies around the world. I particularly like the description of Guy Burgess at the bottom, which is a dark complexion, dark curly hair tinged with grey, chubby face, clean shaven, slightly pigeon-toed. As if the way he walked was the first thing you were going to notice about Guy Burgess. So Philby now knew that he was in serious trouble. He was recalled to London, where he was interrogated by Dick White, MI5's counterintelligence chief, who would actually go on to head both MI5 and MI6. Now, because, as I say, this was really pretty much an old boys' club still, Dick White grilled Philby, but very gently. He didn't ask him any tremendously difficult questions, and Philby simply stonewalled him. He refused to accept any kind of responsibility for what Burgess and Maclean had done. He insisted he was totally innocent, and he professed to be as confused by what was happening as everybody else. This lasted for a while, but it became clear that to MI5 that Philby was not telling the truth, that he was covering something up. And so they unleashed on him a man who I think comes straight out of Central Casting, who was called Bill Scarden, who was the chief interrogator for MI5, a soft-spoken, clever ex-Scotland Yard detective, who interviewed Philby no less than 11 times in his home to try to extract a confession from him with a total lack of success. In fact, Scarden emerged from these investigations believing that Philby was probably innocent after all. What emerged from this was an intense split between the two branches of the intelligence service in Britain. MI5, which is the security service, which looks into sort of internal subversion, and MI6, the external intelligence service, of which Philby was a part. MI5 became more and more convinced that Philby was guilty and covering it up, but they lacked the evidence to prove it. Most officers in MI6, by contrast, were equally convinced of his innocence, but lacked the evidence to exonerate him. And so you had a sort of weird stasis within British intelligence, where one side was convinced that he was bad, and the other was equally convinced that he was good. And the person who flew most immediately to Philby's defence was Nicholas Elliott. He returned from Istanbul and became Philby's chief defender. Even though Philby was forced to leave MI6, he was given a big pension. That was partly due to Elliott. He was sent off with a sort of a golden goodbye. And it was Elliott who paid his bar bills. It was Elliott who paid for his children to go to school. And it would be several more years. Philby was really in the wilderness at this point. He had no job in MI6. He was drinking very heavily. But it was Elliott who propped up his old friend, absolutely refusing to believe there could be any doubt that he was a loyal English patriot. And it would take 4 more years before the case erupted again, when Marcus Lipton, who was a sort of troublemaking Labour MP, stood up in the House of Commons and actually named Kim Philby as the third man. He said he identified Philby as being the person who had tipped off the other two to run to Moscow. Now, bizarrely, this actually worked in Philby's favour, because it now meant that the British government either had to prosecute him, or to exonerate him, or to admit that they didn't have the evidence to take him to court. And Harold Macmillan, then Foreign Secretary, armed with a briefing from Nicholas Elliott, stood up in Parliament and said there is absolutely no evidence to show that Philby is anything other than a completely loyal servant of the British Crown. Now, Philby immediately took advantage of this moment to hold a press conference in his mother's flat. This was the same flat, incidentally, where Vermeulen had been interrogated and interviewed all those years earlier. And he put on a bravura performance. He stonewalled completely. He said that he was totally innocent. He served drinks to the press, which always goes down very well. And believe it or not, this was videotaped. Well, it wouldn't have been videotaped. It was filmed at the time, and you can see it on YouTube. And it's worth looking at the footage of what Philby actually says at this press conference, because it's still used, believe it or not, as a training tool by British intelligence. Young recruits are asked to look at this Philby performing and try to identify anything in his demeanour that gives away the fact that he is lying through his teeth. At the end of it, he emerged completely unscathed. More than that, newspapers ran sort of critical editorials of the government saying that this man has been unfairly hounded. Now, this was obviously a great turning point in Philby's life, but Eliot was not content merely to get Philby off the hook. He wanted to do more than that. It was Eliot who actually got Philby a job in Beirut, working for The Observer and The Economist as a foreign correspondent, but on the understanding that once he was in Beirut, another sort of boiling centre for espionage at the time, he would also be providing intelligence for MI6. The idea was that he would basically come back into what is called the firm. And so that is what he did. Eliot followed Philby to Beirut in 1960 when he was appointed the station chief for MI6 in Beirut. So the two old friends were now working together once again. What you see here are photographs from the private photograph album of the Eliot family, and they show the two families together. That's Philby top left, his second wife Eleanor on the right, and Nicholas Eliot at the bottom there. This is Philby top left playing with his pet fox. That is him bottom left bathing in a mountain pool in Beirut. And the picture on the right shows Philby extremely drunk at a picnic. Philby was at this point mostly extremely drunk. He was clearly using alcohol as a way to deal with his double life, because at this point, while he was working for MI6, he had also re-established contact with the KGB. So everything that Nicholas Eliot was telling him was going straight back to Moscow Center. And that is rather vividly illustrated by the only photograph that I have yet been able to find that shows Philby and Eliot together. This was taken at the home of a CIA officer called Miles Copeland, who you see in the middle of this photograph. So you've got Philby on the left, Copeland in the middle, and Eliot looking with a rather admiring gaze at Philby on the right. So you can read this photograph as MI6, CIA, sorry, other way around. Going from right to left, it goes MI6, CIA, KGB. But the end was coming for Philby, and it was coming in the most unlikely shape of someone called Flora Solomon, who was an executive at Marks and Spencer's. Now, Flora Solomon was an old friend of Philby from the 1930s, who revealed, apropos of a conversation in Tel Aviv with another friend of Philby's, that she had been recruited by Philby, or rather Philby had attempted to recruit her as a Soviet spy in the 1930s. Why it took Flora Solomon 30 years to remember this detail is one of the odder mysteries about this story, and it seems pretty clear that Flora Solomon herself had been a fellow traveller, if not an active agent for Soviet intelligence back in the 1930s, and had covered it up. Once she had made this admission and been interrogated by MI5, the cat was out of the bag. This was the evidence that MI5 had been looking for the whole time. It was passed on to Nicholas Eliot, who, needless to say, was shattered by the discovery that his oldest and closest friend had been betraying him for nearly 30 years. Eliot insisted on taking control of the case personally. He flew to Beirut, where Philby still lived, and confronted him in person. Now, their confrontation was recorded. And it is an extraordinary document, really, because it sounds on the outside like two old friends simply having a drink in a Beirut flat. But the subtext of it was a brutal hand-to-hand fight over what was going to happen to Philby. Over the course of 3 days, Eliot managed to extract from his old friend a sort of partial confession. Philby went as far as admitting that he had worked for Soviet intelligence, but he covered up most of what he'd done. He gave a few names, but only the names that he knew that Eliot already knew. The deal, verbal, never written down, was that if Philby admitted everything, he would have immunity in return. And that was the deal. That was what was going to happen. It was completely illegal. There was no legal allowance for anything of the sort. Philby was a full-on traitor, but within the clubby rules of MI6, the idea was that yes, if he told all, he would be given immunity. And at this point, something extraordinary happened, which was that Eliot simply left Beirut. Why he left, we're never quite sure. I have my own theory in the book. And In January 1963, Philby left his apartment in Beirut, took a taxi down to the docks, climbed onto a Soviet freighter and vanished. He turned up 2 months later in Moscow, where he would spend the rest of his life. Now, Philby's defection sent waves of panic through both the British and the American intelligence communities, because they knew that Philby knew everything and it was going to be extremely tricky. On the other hand, it's possible they also wanted it to happen. James Jesus Angleton, you see him here in later life, a sort of strange cadaver of a figure, never recovered from Philby's defection. He spent the rest of his life hunting for moles within the CIA, convinced that Philby from a distance was orchestrating everything against him. Angleton came very, very close to destroying the CIA completely. And in fact, he was so vigorous and aggressive in his search for moles that some people believed that he himself must be a Soviet mole, otherwise why would he wreak this havoc on his own organization? Here you see Nicholas Elliott in later life. About a year after Philby disappeared, a letter arrived in Elliott's letterbox in London, and it was from Philby. And again, it was a bizarrely chatty letter from an old friend, but it contained a very important line. In it, Philby wrote that now I look back on everything that has happened, I wonder if you didn't want me to do a fade. Now, a fade is intelligence jargon for a defection. Philby had become convinced that Elliott had deliberately left the door open to Moscow, and he might well have been right. Because the one thing that is quite clear is that nobody wanted Philby back in London on the court, in the dock in a court, because then Philby would have been in a brilliant position to destroy everything. So it is entirely likely, it seems to me, that Philby, although he pretended that he'd escaped magnificently and got away to Moscow, it seems to me much more likely that he was pushed. He didn't jump, he was pushed. Kim Philby spent the last 25 years of his life in Moscow. He never criticized the system he'd supported all his life. He never acknowledged the true character of the Stalinist organization he'd served. He never admitted the hundreds of people he had sent to torture and death. And he never uttered a single word of remorse. He insisted until his dying day that he'd made the right decision and was blissfully happy in Moscow. In fact, he was miserable. He even tried to kill himself at one point. He was usually drunk. But he could never admit that he was wrong, even to himself. And there is a sort of poetic justice, it seems to me, in that. Here was a man who had made deception a way of life, but who spent his final years deceiving himself. He'd always put politics above everything else, he insisted, but he missed his friends back in Britain. Friendship, he said, is the most important thing of all. And this was a man who had systematically betrayed and deceived all those who loved him most. But in a way, he was right, because Philby was an extraordinary man. No one better understood the value of friends, because friendship was the key to his spycraft. It was the reason, in fact, why he was, and remains, the most successful double agent of all time. Thank you very much. Now, I'd love to take some questions if you have them, so fire away. I don't know how we do this, whether there's a roving mic that goes round, but...
Why don't I begin with a question?
Lovely.
Are you going to join?
Should I come and join you?
At a certain point in the book, you point out that the life of being employed by MI6 while actually working for the NKVD is not a bad life. In fact, it's almost the best of both worlds, because you get to serve global communism while actually living the life of the haute bourgeoisie in London or in Washington, D.C. But it was something more than that, something deeper than that motivated Kim Philby. Something at one point you call the erotic charge of infidelity that applies as much to to spy work as to other kinds of relationships?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Philby was a very odd sort of communist, it has to be said. I mean, he, as you say, he lived pretty high on the hog. I mean, he was a champagne communist, if that's a term. In fact, you know, for someone who spent his life battling on behalf of the proletariat, I think he had never actually met a member of the working class. And so he lived a very happy, comfortable, upper middle class English life. But Philby's communism is also, as you say, interesting in another way. He began, I am convinced, as a pure ideologue. I've no doubt that at the age of 18 he believed utterly in communism. But as time went on, it seems to me his relationship with his own beliefs rather changed. And he became, and you can tell this from the way he writes about it, he became besotted with the idea of deception, with the idea of knowing just a little bit more than everybody else around him. And that carries, in a way, as you say, its own sort of almost, it is erotic, it's a sort of romantic charm of the adulterer. I mean, he was an absolutely fully committed adulterer. I mean, he never stopped throughout his 3 marriages. Indeed, interestingly enough, when he arrived in Moscow, the only people he actually knew were the Macleans, were Donald Maclean and his wife Melinda. And within a very short space of time, Philby had started having an affair with Melinda, which takes some doing, actually. I mean, the idea that you're the only person you knew there who was an old friend of yours, you would immediately start sleeping with his wife, was quite an achievement, really. But I think it's representative of exactly what you described, the kind of the erotic charge of infidelity that Philby seems to have had throughout his life. And he enjoyed the adventure, there's no doubt about that. It was an exciting life. You know, one minute he would be battling, you know, Nazi spies in occupied France, and the next he would be passing on the information in sort of coded messages to his Moscow handler. That was, he loved the double life, I think.
Any questions from the audience? Only questions, please, no comments, and do make them short. There's a woman over here on the left. In the back, yeah.
How did you get the information on the documents that you had, and how long did it take to, study the character and write the book?
Well, MI6, you can imagine, is extremely sensitive about this subject, and still has refused to release most of its archive. I mean, there is an enormous archive on Kim Philby inside MI6 archives. In fact, his telephone intercepts alone run to about 55 volumes. They're that high. But that said, MI5, the security service, is much more open with its secrets, and it has a much more a much more liberal view about letting them out. Also, it quite likes spiking MI6's guns, so it quite likes releasing information that is embarrassing to MI6. And so there has been quite a lot of MI5 information has leaked out, including a very big tranche about 3 months before this book was published, which I was able to sort of bring in. So there is quite a lot of documentary evidence. There's a lot more to come. Whether MI6 will ever release all its archive, I strongly doubt. It's not a subject they're terribly keen on. The idea of this mole in their midst. Indeed, it still haunts MI6. A certain sort of intelligence officer still goes white at the mention of Philby's name. He's a sort of byword for everything that went completely wrong. But he did, in a funny way, Philby, have a very salutary effect on British intelligence, because after he'd been exposed and after the scandal came out, the whole structure of the old boy network really collapsed. You could no longer really be recruited on the basis of the old school tie. It just doesn't happen anymore, thank God. Thank you.
Right up here, up front.
Was it common to find that kind of naivety amongst the upper classes?
I think there was a sense that, well, one thing one has to bear in mind, that the post-war structure of MI6 was almost entirely staffed by men who had fought together in the Second World War. And that, I think, created a kind of bond of loyalty and belief in each other that was much more intense than any other kind of bond. So I think in that sense that there was a sort of blindness to what was going on. Whether it was naivety exactly, I think there was a sense that people who looked right and who spoke with the right accent and who'd been to the right schools and universities could not possibly be working for the other side. Whereas, of course, the brilliance of the NKVD, of people like Deutsch, was to realise that those people who looked perfect were the ideal recruits, because within the context that we're talking about, they were totally invisible. It just didn't seem possible to someone like Eliot that Philby could, on the one hand, be a member of, the Athenaeum Club in Pall Mall and watch a lot of English cricket, and at the same time be a Russian spy. It just simply didn't compute for him. Although, interestingly with Eliot, there was also, I think, a willful disbelief. He did not want to believe the evidence that was sitting in front of him because it was just too painful and ultimately would have been too destructive to the organisation that he'd served. But I think the short answer to your question is yes. I think this was very prevalent within MI6, this kind of class-based refusal to believe that a member of your tribe could actually be working for a completely different tribe.
We will come to you, sir, but I really want to bring in Shravani Basu, who's over here, and is, of course, the author of another book about a marvelous book about a spy, The Spy Princess.
Thanks for that wonderful talk, Ben. I just wanted to know, as you said, Kim betrayed hundreds of his fellow Britons, no regrets. Why is he still such a fascinating person? Why, the Brits seem to have a love-hate relation with Kim Philby. Why is that?
I think it's partly because of his double life. I mean, Philby's charm was very real. I mean, it wasn't put on. It wasn't a sort of glib make-believe. He sort of represented, I think, to a lot of his friends, something very real about Britain. And I think for a lot, particularly for British readers, there's something irresistible about someone who is able to be two things simultaneously. I mean, Brits are notorious dissemblers anyway, and hence the sort of theatrical tradition and all of that. So I think that is partly his grip. And it does last. I mean, one of the more extraordinary moments of research into this book was when I interviewed Nicholas Eliot's widow. And it was really about 2 months before she died. I mean, she was already in ailing health. She was in her mid-90s by this point. But still had all her marbles. And I said to her, what do you feel about Kim Philby these days? This man betrayed your husband, destroyed his career, destroyed their lives. And this look came on into her eyes. And she said, oh, Kim Philby. Oh, we loved Kim Philby. Philby was a great friend. We miss him terribly. I mean, so this extraordinary. That's what I loved about the book, was that this man could be so bleakly ruthless on the one hand, and yet could be such great company and somebody that if he walked into a room at the Jaipur Literary Festival, you'd feel all the lights had suddenly gone on. You'd think, oh, Philby's arrived, the party's begun. I mean, he was that sort of person. So I think it's that duality that we love investigating in British culture.
Thanks.
Yeah, a hand up here. And then there's one behind.
Were you able to have access to any Russian sources? Because to my surprise, in Stalin's Englishman, I saw they had actually NKVD reports from the other side.
There was I'm sure you know the answer to some of this. Very early on after Perestroika, there was a brief moment when the KGB files were opened up, when you could actually get access to them if you paid the right people and if you knew the right people and if you said the right things and if you didn't look at the files they didn't want you to look at, you could actually get in. And there was a brief moment when the Philby files on that side were accessed, and some very enterprising Russian journalists got in there. They wrote books mostly in Russian, mostly at that time, but there's a lot of material that I was able to mine subsequently that has not been used before. There's an awful lot more to go in the Philby archive, in the KGB archives, but it's slammed shut now. I don't think there's any hope of getting access to that in the near future, certainly not under this current regime. Putin regards Philby as a hero of the Soviet Union. I mean, interestingly, when I was in Moscow recently, I visited Philby's graveside in the cemetery in Moscow. And interestingly, he is surrounded by Russian wartime generals. He's in a sort of military part of the cemetery. And that's something struck me that had never struck me before, which is, of course, in Russian eyes, and before that in Soviet eyes, Philby was a wartime hero. He was someone who had worked for the Soviet cause during the war and had enabled Stalin to have a much better idea of what was going on in the Allied camp than he would otherwise have had. So I hope that answers your question. There is much more to come from Moscow. I don't think Putin is going to be the person to release it.
So we'll just take two more questions, and these two gentlemen over here, one with a black baseball cap, two short questions.
Coming from your last take on who is more valuable, would it be Sidney Riley or Kim Philby? As far as the Russians are concerned, who weighs heavier in their pan, Sidney Riley or Kim Philby?
Sidney Riley, the ace of spies, the legendary, I can't remember when he died, Riley. I think it was during the First World War. It was a very different era. Riley's always been a slightly dodgy figure in my view, because there's so little documentary evidence about Riley. I mean, he was supposed to be our great spy who penetrated the Bolsheviks and who was in fact executed by the Bolsheviks. I think it was in 1916. No, it must have been 1917. But a lot of the Riley story is based on hearsay and memoirs and all that slightly unreliable secondary sources. Who weighs? Well, the Soviets love Philby. They have very little time for Riley, I think, who was regarded as being, the sort of epitome of a kind of imperialist British spy, although being, I think I'm right in saying, Russian-born. Don't let Sidney Riley fool you. It wasn't his original name. Thank you. And perhaps one more.
Was Philby's greatest success in destroying any real cooperation between the CIA and British intelligence?
That's a very good question. I mean, the CIA was staggered to discover that the man appointed by British intelligence to be the head of British intelligence in Washington, D.C. was a career Soviet spy. And it led to a tremendous freezing of relations, admittedly short-lived, between the CIA and British intelligence. It really did huge damage to that supposedly special relationship. It recovered in the end, and it also recovered in a way that was extremely beneficial. And of course, let us not forget that the Americans discovered a very large number, a very much larger number of Soviet spies within their own, within the ranks of the American establishment than the British ever did. So things equaled out in the end. And of course, finally, in 1996, they discovered that the head of their Soviet counterintelligence operation, Audrey James, was also a KGB spy. So in a way, what goes around comes around, and the crowing that took place, well, actually it was rather angry, but the crowing on behalf of Hoover and other people who believed that the British had essentially just made a complete balls up of the whole thing went very quiet after Audrey James was exposed, so it didn't last all that long.
Trust nobody. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Macintyre, a spy among friends. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you to Ben Macintyre, Raghu Karnad, and that session was presented by the Indian Quarterly Presents the Privacy Series. Ben will be signing books. The book signing area is at the back left corner of the Rajnigandha Silver Pearls front lawn, so please do make your way over there if you would like Ben Macintyre to sign a book for you. I believe he can't stay too long because he's being whisked off to the press area, but he will go for a short time. So that brings us to the end of the literary sessions for today, day one of the 2016 Zee Jaipur Literature Festival. However, there is a music concert tonight, and we encourage you all to join us if you're in the mood for some music and dance. That performance will be at the Clarkson Mayor Hotel from 7:30 to 10, and the performers are Yom and Wang Li and a Rajasthan band Kudle Khan, a bit of a staple here at the Zee Jaipur Literature Festival. So please do join us. Tickets are 400 rupees and the concert starts at 7:30 tonight.